welcome back to Cinema Pursuit. Today we are riding on the Fury Road with Mad Max today. Zach, this movie is honestly one of my favorite movies. So I'm going to let you ask me the question I always ask you.
Witness me! No, Vikash, what are
Mediocre.
Vikash, why this movie, man? Why are we doing this 2010s movie on this podcast? Why are we doing one of the greatest action movies of all time on this podcast? Why are we doing the GOAT's GOAT work on this podcast? Vikash, tell me.
You mean the best action movie that America's ever put out? This is technically kind of an Australian movie, but this is one of the best movies of the 2010s. It might be the best movie of the 2010s. Come at me with that, but it's like, this is just a fantastic movie, and I don't have to say the words. Everyone else has said it themselves. I'm going to throw to Soderbergh real quick. Like, I have no idea how they're not still shooting this movie. He's like, oh, I'll watch some Fincher, I'll watch some Spielberg, I'll watch some Cameron, I'll watch some John McTiernan. But even then, the staging and the sequences that George Miller has in Mad Max Fury Road cannot, like, that's the best stuff out there. So, I mean, it really is one of the best movies ever made, and it's not just an action movie.
Yeah. No, I completely agree. There's a lot of layers to it. I would just say that this is really the Terminator 2 of the 2010s, of this generation of action film.
Oh, yeah.
It's a director, a legendary director at the top of his game. It is, a movie that contains multitudes, action, drama, politics, all that stuff together. And at the end of it, it also pushes the action genre forward, just like Terminator 2 did. So I really, whenever I think about this movie, I think about it in those terms, that this is a landmark achievement in action filmmaking.
That means, so we had Terminator, and then before Terminator, we had Die Hard. And Die Hard, obviously, we have Speed and all these spin-offs for that. Terminator, obviously, is still very prevalent today in our minds. And then after that, we had The Matrix. Matrix changed everything, especially in India. It changed everything. Bourne came after that. Thank God for all the shaky cam that people try to put into movies. They're like, oh yeah, let's use this style. But we don't understand why they use that style. But after that, obviously, we have John Wick and Mad Max kind of came out at the same time, 2014, 15, and then John Wick 2 is 2017. So our era, it's John Wick and Mad Max. And that means like the Kung Fu, the Judo, all the stuff that John Wick does, plus the cinematic visual mayhem that is Mad Max, has influenced us all, especially as filmmakers, culture. Mad Max is that movie. Because I think you can speak to it more than I can, that Mad Max is practically a video game movie, isn't it?
Yeah. Very much straightforward and linear in terms of what you're going after. This is a chase movie. It's a slow chase movie. We're trying to get from point A to point B. There's going to be a lot of action, a lot of violence, a lot of, cool stuff happening on the way. But at the end of the day, when you're in the movie, you never are wondering what the plot is or where you're going. You know what they're going. They're going to the green place. That's the plot of the movie. And it does remind you a lot of a video game plot where it's like, this is the objective. We're trying to get to the objective. And the fun part is everything you have to go through to try to get to that objective. So, yeah, I agree with that.
And it's funny because they wrote this in like 97, 98. That's when
Really?
they started writing this movie. So they wrote it all those years back, and they spent a couple years. So for anybody who doesn't know, they literally sat in a boardroom, and it was George Miller, a couple writers, and a comic book artist. And they were literally just drawing frames, and that became the script. There was no physical script. There is one online that's like 500 pages, but it ended up being 3,500 frames. And you could literally go through and see all the shots for the movie. There's no script, and that's kind of the genius of it, and kind of a problem for like getting people to understand what this was.
And it goes to show how much of a visionary George Miller is. And I don't use that word lightly because everybody will call anybody a visionary, but he truly is. I mean, literally vision. He had the vision for the movie in his head, and he basically made almost a comic strip of exactly what he thought the movie was going to look like. Like you said, 500 pages. How much of that is dialogue, though?
There's dialogue, but it's nothing crazy. It's like, for like a big budget movie, this might have the most sparse amount of dialogue, besides like John Wick not saying anything for like 3 hours in John Wick 4. Besides that, I mean, but it's like, it doesn't feel like, oh, there's no dialogue. There's always something happening. Your brain is always moving with this movie.
There's dialogue, but it's not quippy like a Marvel movie where they can't let I know, I'm sorry to bring it up. But it's a good comparison because when you look at Marvel movie action and even a lot of modern action, it's very quippy, a lot of jokey. Every couple seconds, they got to say something funny. This movie, it'll let the action sit. It'll say little instead of saying a lot. It makes very deliberate choices of when they want anybody to say anything, especially the two main characters, Max and Furiosa. They don't say a lot in this movie, but when they do, it commands your attention because they're filling a void that is usually just dead air.
And that's the thing. The reason why I was laughing is that, so I said there was two writers along with George Miller. One of those writers ended up leaving. So George Miller at this time in like the late 90s was shooting Babe, like the second pig movie, like the talking pig movie. And he was also working on Mad Max, among other things. And he got them to write dialogue. He's like, okay, this is the direction you need to go in, or like not. So they just spend their day writing. And then sometimes George would show up. He'd tell him which way to go, and then he'd leave. And this man just started writing the most quippy dialogue, the most action-y 90s sort of vibe dialogue, which is very much what we see in Marvel movies. And you see it in the movie, it's not there because obviously he was like, yeah, I left the movie, but it's like, I understand why. Like, me and George just couldn't see eye to eye. It's like, I love the other writer I was writing with, but me and George, we fundamentally did not understand each other as to what we wanted to make with this movie. George was right with his instincts.
Yeah, and I don't blame the writer either. If you look at 2016, that was almost the peak of Marvel movies, or just below before it. And if it was trying to modernize the Mad Max movies, you would think, okay, it's supposed to be quippier, it's supposed to be faster paced, faster cut, more CGI, all that stuff. And, they do some of what I just said, but a lot, they did modernize it in a lot of ways. The action that they did in this movie would have not been possible 10, 20 years before. But he still had a specific vision for it that wasn't like other action and blockbuster movies of its time that makes it hold up and not feel like it's chained as a product of its time. It feels timeless in that way.
You can look at maybe Denis Villeneuve with Dune, Dune 1, Dune 2, where it's like the CGI is like really good. And this is, I wouldn't say this movie has the best CGI, but it's like the use of it is fantastic. And it's like you have to know when to use it, how to use it, and then that gives you perception as to how you're making your movie. And George Miller had the right base of everything he was doing with this movie, pretty much. So, that being said, Zach, what are our memories for this movie? I say our memories at first because we did see this movie together. 2015, we were in college. Set the scene, Zach.
Sure. This is one of those movies, like a lot of great movies I've seen in theater, where Vikash is saying, Zach, you have to go to this. And I'm like, I don't really care about Mad Max. I don't like Mel Gibson. He's like, Mel Gibson's not in this. I'm like, I still don't like Mad Max, and he's like, no, you got to come see this. I'm like, okay, whatever. The guy who did Babe 2 and Happy Feet, fine, I'll go see it. So we get to the theater. This is the Regal Theater that is sort of near where we were living. I think it was a farther drive for Vikash. And it's a rundown theater. It's not even open anymore. It probably had another 5 years after this, maybe less, honestly. I think COVID killed it or died right before. But we go, there's a bunch of people there. I don't really know any of them.
It was me, you, Ross, and then all of Ross's friends.
Okay, so a bunch of people I don't know. And we're there. And, of course, we see the movie. It blows my mind. One of my favorite theater experiences. It's up there really high. And we get out. And the first thing one of the guys in the other group says is like, that was mid. It was okay, underwhelming. And then I looked at Vikash after we all talked for a little bit, and then we walked away, and I looked at Vikash, and I said, Vikash, I never want to see a movie with any of them again.
Damn right. And it was like, they were like, oh, it's like, it's not realistic. And like, there's a girl, a woman, she was complaining about it. I was like, do y'all not understand what this movie was? I was like, I did not just watch cinematic greatness, and y'all really thought this was just like the run-of-the-mill, same little spoon-fed meal that you're typically getting with these big-budget movies. This is not something that's typical. We have not seen anything like this again. Till I saw the Furiosa trailer, I haven't seen anything like this. Not that there isn't great action work out there, but it's like this is some singular vision, crazy vibes, and it's just so magically put together. And I really do not understand how people, like, they watch it, they're like, oh yeah, this isn't peak. Yeah. This isn't something that's like completely different to what I've seen before.
Yeah, and to be fair, like the first time I saw it, it's not like this was a 10 out of 10 for me the first time. I was so overwhelmed by the action.
It was for me. It was for me.
I mean, I wasn't on their camp of being mid. I was somewhere in between you two where I was like, that was awesome. But like, I was so focused on the action, it felt kind of almost empty calories to me because I didn't get the rest of it. And then I watch it again, and I don't know how many years later, but I sit down and watch it again, and I'm like, oh, he set this up here. Oh, this is a really cool world building moment here. Oh, I understand the arc of the character now. Like, this is stuff that, because and this happens to me sometimes when I see an amazing film in the theater. When I saw Her in the theater, this happened to me. There's some others I can't think of now, where the first time I'm so overwhelmed by the visuals and just the art style and the direction that I don't catch the whole plot and I miss some things. And so when I watched this again, I was like, oh, not only was this an incredible display of action and stunt coordination, there's a really good story here that's understated in a good way on purpose.
Oh yeah. And for me, like, this was back in high school for us, 2012. They put up the first image of Max. It's Jason Boland. I follow him on Instagram. He's one of the still photographers that was on this movie. He posted a photo of Mad Max, of like just Tom Hardy in some, in his garb. And I was just like, yes, they're making another Mad Max movie. I'm excited for this. And then 3 years went by. We get the first trailer, that Flight of the Bumblebees or whatever that trailer was. Fantastic trailer. It's like, how can you not be in on this already? And after that, obviously, we saw the movie. The movie came on HBO. I probably saw it another 10 times on HBO. Anytime it was on, I was watching it. And for me, it's like, whether I'm studying, whether I'm working all day, whatever it is, I want to come home and I want to watch something that's kind of engaging. And this was like something where it's like, I can sit back. I've already seen, I know the plot, and I can just like practically research what this amazing genius has done. And it's just, I've seen it so many times where I literally didn't even need to watch the movie again, but I did watch it again when we did this.
And what's crazy too is how big of a gamble it is if you think about it. Like, every year Hollywood puts out another movie that's a remake or a kind of sequel of an old movie just to take that IP and try to revive it. I mean, they're starting up the Ghostbuster franchise like it's a car with a bad starter, like they can't ever get that going. And, I'm sure the new one probably made a bunch of money and I'm wrong, but whatever. But what I'm saying is, like, this was a huge gamble. There probably wasn't a huge appetite for a Mad Max movie at the time, but because George had such a singular vision for how to make a modern Mad Max movie, and that was nothing we've seen before on film, it worked. It didn't have to be a Mad Max movie. It could have been anything. It could have been Borderlands 3, the new Borderlands movie, it doesn't matter. But what I'm saying is that, he took this franchise that he loves, and that's important. He made the originals, which it might be why some of the current ones don't work, is people were in making them maybe we're not fans or don't have the level of investment that George has in his story. All that to say is that this was a really risky proposition, and it was one of the rare times that it paid off.
I recommend anybody to go to YouTube. They have the behind the scenes, the making of this movie. Warner Brothers has posted it. And there is actually a book that I will cite at the end that I have read a decent chunk of that is just fantastic, that talks about the firsthand experiences of maybe some media people like journalists and the people that actually were in these films. But this movie was a hard movie to make, one of the hardest movies to make of all time. But this movie is not great because it was hard to make. It's like Apocalypse Now was not great because Francis Ford Coppola went to hell and back to make that movie. It's like whatever's on screen is what matters. And when I'll drop a little tidbit here and there about the process of making this movie over like 20 years. But this movie, I'm telling you, Zach, you would pull out your hair. I would lose my mind trying to make this movie. I sympathize with anybody out there. They're like, oh yeah, this is impossible. Everyone who worked on this movie has nothing but good things to say about it. But pretty much every single one of them had doubts about it. Like, this is practically like a $200 million independent movie. I don't know how they're going to put this together. We're just doing all this crazy stuff, but it doesn't feel like there's any story. We don't know what's going on. And it's just, you had to rely on George Miller. And some of them did, and some of them couldn't. Even at Cannes Film Festival, when they premiered the movie, they're sitting at the media table and Tom Hardy has to be like, George, I'm sorry. Like, I didn't understand this movie. I didn't understand what you were trying to do, but what you've pulled off is excellent. And it's like, it takes a lot of humility to say that in the first place in front of people, but it's like, even the lead of this movie didn't understand, the quote unquote lead of this movie didn't understand what was going on.
Yeah. I've read a lot of the backstory, like you said, where they a lot of them were like, I don't know what I'm doing, and I don't blame them, because conceptually, you look at this movie when they're filming it, and it's this chase. I could see why it's hard to put together the pieces of what you're trying to make here. I imagine a lot of this movie was created in the editing room, where they had a lot of footage and had to figure out, how do we want to put this together.
I do want to say, I have a little piece to say, is that every time some sort of like crazy thing happens when they're trying to make a movie, I think it's become like a marketing gimmick at this point, where it's like, oh yeah, it was really hard to make this movie, and this, I am singling out Dev Patel and Monkey Man not because it's a bad thing, and he did literally go through hell trying to make Monkey Man, but it's like, it's a way to sell a movie now, that it's like, this was an arduous journey that I went through to make this movie, and I hope you enjoy it.
Yeah.
And I don't know, it's like, why does it have to be a marketing gimmick? Why can't it just like exist that like, yeah, this was a hard thing to do. Making movies is hard, but it's like, yeah, sometimes it gets harder for some folks.
I would say if it was truly a hard or divisive film experience, I would say you probably don't find out for a few years. You don't find it out during the release of the movie. You find out like 3-4 years later, or maybe they're giving interviews.
Solo.
Yeah.
Star Wars story, Solo.
Yeah.
Solo Lord of Miller.
I mean, that's when you do find it out, though.
I just had a cough
or
storm.
if it's like, hey, we're firing our directors and we need to tell you why, because we want to make our studio not look bad and lose a bunch of stock, value. Lord of Miller, that sort of thing. So we're getting off on a tangent.
So we already talked about the influence, but I want to talk about the main character for this movie. Zach, who's the main character for this movie?
Furiosa.
Furiosa is the main character for this movie. One of the writers, he was like, yeah, I guess we wrote ourselves into this wall and we never really figured out how to get out of it. And that wall was like, this is not a Mad Max story. This is very much Max is getting dragged along by a chain with his blood bag or whatever. And he's just like, yeah, I'm along for the ride. I'm going to facilitate the redemption of this movie. And that's it. I'm gonna leave. And that's what the ending is. It's like, okay, y'all good? I'm out. This is not my path. Like, I've been through so much already, and it's like The Searchers. This is like, John Wayne and The Searchers, where it's like
Shane.
Lone Warrior sort of vibe.
Yeah.
This man, Shane, Logan, James Mangold. But talk about the pop culture.
Yeah.
Like, how, like the history of the women, right? When it comes to action, who do we have, Zach? Who's the first one on top?
Charlize.
The oldest one.
Charlize. What are you talking about? No.
I'm talking about Ripley first.
Oh, yeah.
Alien.
Okay. I
Aliens.
thought you meant like, I don't know, still doing action movies. Yeah, no, I get what you're saying.
Oh, yeah. Oh, actually, I do love the old guard. Atomic Blonde. After Charlize made this, she really went on a action junkie thing. But yeah, all of the greatest women of all time. These characters are fantastic. We're talking about Furiosa joins the ranks of Ripley from Aliens, Sarah Connor from Terminator. We have Trinity from The Matrix. We have the bride from Kill Bill. Yeah. We have Full Metal Bit, whatever, from Edge of Tomorrow, Emily Blunt's character. Mm-hmm. And you could throw in like a Katniss, from Hunger Games, or like a Hermione. But like Furiosa is that lady. Like, this movie is her movie. She just snatches it away from Max in the greatest way possible.
But it's interesting that you bring up Terminator 2. Like I was talking about earlier, Furiosa in this movie reminds me the most of Sarah Connor in Terminator 2. Just that trying to be strong on the outside, even though they're struggling, having to play that really hard line. That I get a lot of that from both performances.
Oh yeah. And it's a thing where it's like they set out writing this character as like, this is Warrior Woman. It wasn't even Furiosa as her name first. They essentially were like, okay, this is going to be a foil. This is going to be Mad Max. It's going to be Max Rodinkowski, but it's going to be a woman. But they're like, that can't be it. If we do that, it's not going to work. And then they just kept working on it, and they kind of figured it out to where it's like, this is going to be her story. We're going to follow her. And a lot of George's decisions on this movie were like, I'm going to trust you to do this. And he trusted Charlize to like actually get in there and kind of build the look and have this sort of feeling of like ownership, authorship of Furiosa. And the only thing that George did that was actually fantastic was, if I'm going to have this story of where these women that are wives, sex slaves, these breeders, if they have to be taken away to the green place, it has to be a woman doing it. It cannot be Max doing it. And that's the best decision he made. It was not a thing where he was like, oh, this is going to be a feminist action movie and we're going to make it this way and we're going to be inspiring. This is not the end of Avengers Endgame where the women get together. And it's like, I love all these characters, but you're not doing them justice. This is not something to check off a list. You have to have enduring character moments for these women for it to actually matter and like be a good memory for audiences. So there's a testament within what George did, and there's a testament within what, Charlize did. There's, if anybody wants to go look and find the old photos of what Furiosa actually looked like, completely different. Tattoos, long hair, all this crazy stuff going on. And Charlize was like, I'm gonna shave my head, and I'm gonna kind of be androgynous, and in this world where all these men are running around and she's gotta be one of them and get respected, this is what she would do. And it's like Charlize brought it there. A lot of actors, their ego would not enable them to like go and shave their head, but Charlize went and did it. She put in the work. She has done so much behind the scenes for this movie where she didn't necessarily need to do it, but she definitely believed in what George was doing. Even when she didn't understand what he was doing, she was like, okay, I'm Furiosa. Let me do the best thing that Furiosa can do at every single step of the way.
Yeah. I mean, she has a history doing that too. She won her first Oscar for the movie Monster, where she has to, basically make herself look,
Yeah.
The great actors who look good have no problem with also making themselves look. She doesn't look bad in this movie, but look different. Like you said, androgynous, not be this female fatale, type character. And yeah, I mean, this movie really does hinge on her performance and her ability to be physical, to command the screen. I remember when I saw it back then, I actually was almost disappointed that she wasn't actually revealed to be Max at the end. I thought that would have been kind of a cool thing. And now, like, I'm completely on the other side of that. I think they made the right decision keeping her as a separate character, because I think it's more impressive to show, hey, this world has more than just Max in it, who, not everybody in this world's a power-hungry maniac. There's other people like Max in this world who are searching for redemption, searching from somewhere to go in the desert. What is in the desert for me? Who knows,
So the original ending that was kind of written for the story, and there was a lot that was shot and not used and things like that. There's a mention of Mad Max going up into the Citadel,
Yeah.
and then like actually bringing Furiosa up there, and it was kind of like Furiosa and Max had a relationship. And you think that would have been a good idea if he went up there?
No.
So George Miller shot that, and it was the only time in his career apparently where he shot one take. And he knew he was literally just appeasing like essentially like the studio heads or whoever it was, where it's like, I'm gonna shoot this, but I know I'm not gonna use this. And the confidence that this man has, the confidence and perseverance that he practiced through the entire journey of making this is something else.
Yeah, and I don't know much about Mad Max as the character, but in this movie that parallels him with Western heroes, from in like Western movies. The Western movie tradition is that the Lone Ranger, sinks back out into the desert. He goes into the frontier. And so him staying would be against the character they established in this movie.
I think he is supposed to be that sort of mythic Western character. Do you know who actually came up in my head when I was rewatching it this time? I swear I've seen this movie 15 plus times and I've never thought about this. And maybe it's because I was wearing headphones for once instead of like watching it on a TV. It was Sergio Leone. Do you remember we watched The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly in class? Do you remember this back in high school? And I fell asleep because I had already seen it. It was like 7th period. I was tired. When you watch any of Leone's movies, he's kind of known for like having dialogue that isn't synced because everything is looped over. It's ADR. Mm-hmm. So 95% of this movie is ADR. And at certain points in this movie, I'm like, that's not Tom Hardy saying that line. But it's like, that's not the point of this movie.
Yeah.
Like, if you understand that, it's like, this movie is about the ride, and they were in the desert, these cars, and I guess the audio just didn't come out well, but they really did build this movie, forge it up in the editing. And 95% ADR is kind of unheard of.
Yeah.
And for the most part, when they do ADR, it is noticeable. It is noticeable in this movie, but it is fantastic work all around.
Well, one thing I just want to throw out there, and I'm just catching you off guard here, but something I've been thinking about after we did watch Mad Max is that we need to do a theater experience draft. We need to do a draft where we draft our, movies that we saw in the theater that we had amazing experiences or make a top 10 or do something. We've been talking about a lot of movies recently on this podcast that we had great theater experiences seeing, and this is one of the best. There's a conversation that needs to be had about what movies from the 2000s and the 2010s were historic theater movies, because you can go back into the 90s, the 80s, and there's a lot of people who talk about, Terminator 2, a lot of the Arnold movies, Rocky.
Yeah.
But what are the movies for the 2010s and the 2000s that fit that vibe? I think we should investigate that at some point.
I think my list would be pretty crazy because obviously we're going to have Mad Max. We're going to have like Gravity.
Yeah.
But I want to throw in like a Prisoners or something like that. I want to throw in like the ones where it's like, dang, like what is this? I'm being caught off guard, and that's what you want. You want to be surprised. And I think I've got a lot.
Yeah.
I've got a lot actually. Or we're in the 4th year into 2020s, and I've got some for the 3 years that we've gone through. Even though I saw Tenet and like Bad Boys 3 in theaters twice before like COVID or whatever. But we're gonna do that on the pod at some point. That's gonna be exciting.
Let's bookmark that.
Do you want to talk about post-apocalyptic movies or anything?
I would say that this movie is one of the better ones, but my only one I'm thinking of right now is Book of Eli, so I don't have a lot to add.
I got you. There's a lot of post-apocalyptic and apocalyptic movies out there. It ranges from the comedies. It's like Don't Look Up, This Is the End, Day After Tomorrow, Book of Eli, 28 Days Later, Dawn for the Planet of the Apes. Yep, right? So, in even A Quiet Place, you'd say that's an apocalypse movie in my head. Oblivion. So, it's like there's a gamut. There's like so many different, like, oh, this is the end of the world, and then we're living in this world, and what actually happened in this world. And I think that George Miller's take on this, there's a lot of drama. There's a lot of like important adult topics that he covers thematically, but this is a fun movie. And Tom Hardy is actually the one who mentions like, this is not some like apocalypse movie where like the road, it is extremely bleak. That's not what this is. Yeah, there's a bleakness to this world, but it's like the guitars are strumming, the drums are going, and it's like there's a forward moving propulsion to this that it's like, yeah, you understand what's going on in this world, but it's not necessarily like the main thing that you're like dourly sitting in the entire time. You're always invested in what's going on and moving forward, trying to get to the green place, trying to get back to the Citadel. You're trying to get somewhere in this movie. And Mad Max gets into my heart. I'll tell you that.
No, that stuff's there if you want it. Like, who killed the world? That's a question that is asked in the movie. But it's there if you want it, but it never is in your face, and they never linger on it. They give you just enough to get your attention, and then they move on. It's almost like they're doing they're doing what Lost did, but instead of like Lost, everybody being frustrated they never answered the question. With this movie, you're happy they never answered the question because it adds a mystique to the world. You see what do they call them? The crows in the, what eventually was the green place. They never tell you what the crows are about, but you know what? Adding that little detail in there, that makes your mind understand this world is bigger than what we even knew. And those little details were so important in making this movie feel like even a bigger movie than what it was.
And you're right. There's a lot in this movie where it's like, it is so well thought out. They never explain anything, but you understand what's happening. They set the scene with the opening, and that's about it. We see details, but nothing's ever like, oh, exposition, throwing exposition. This is not like, oh, this 150 years into the future, we're living in this world. It's just you get the little thing at the beginning of like, the nuclear storm and all that sort of stuff. And George Miller purposely makes this on the nose. Where are the 3 places that they have? It's like there's a guy with all the water. There's, Gas Town, and then there's Bullet Farm, right? There's nothing else in this world. And it's like you have, means to survive and then means to kill people. And that's all that's left. It's like humans have been degraded into an animalistic form.
Yeah.
And the movie's supposed to be about redemption and rebellion and trying to do better. But that sort of apocalypse stuff is very much present. So, Zach, production value instead of action of the juice today. We're not going in order because we're going in order of scenes. Zach, what is your production value moment for this movie? Where is the most impressive piece of this movie to you? Where it's a shot, scene, or moment where everything feels like it was left on screen, nothing is left off. What screamed production value for the amazing Mad Max Fury Road?
Yeah, so I kind of just stepping on what I was literally just talking about. But this movie is a textbook for, having your audiences to want more. There's very small parts of the Citadel were shown where it has like the women who are pumping breast milk that is used to like, keep certain people hydrated and nutrients, and
Mother's milk.
It's weird. I mean, like I said before, the crows and the green place, the differences in each faction's cars and their like goons. The movie just gives you so many nuggets and interesting concepts, but never makes you feel like you actually need the full backstory. Instead, this is, in a good way, window dressing to serve the plot itself, to keep you engaged and to be like, oh, are you awake? We're going to show you this new thing in the story and not tell you anything about it. And it's a good thing and it works. And I haven't seen a movie pull this off very often, or they get worried that they're going to confuse their audience and then go way too far in the explanation. I'm not even going to say what movies I'm thinking about, but you'll know which ones.
Oh, I'm gonna say one. As soon as you said that, I was like, oh, it's like the old Star Wars before they started making too much Star Wars, and everything is explained now, rather than leaving these illustrious elements out to where it's like you choose what your story is, you choose what that is, just whatever you're thinking.
Yeah, no, exactly. There's like a great example, like Admiral Akbar in the Star Wars movies. Like he's a whole different type of alien in the original Star Wars. You see him, they don't explain where he came from, they don't explain why he's in the rebellion. He's just a different looking dude. They got the little mouse droids on the Death Star that are riding around. What do? I don't know. But guess what? It gives, credence to that this is a real breathing, living environment, and we thought about it, and there's a real backstory here, but we don't need to tell you, and you don't need to know.
That's why I am a Star Wars fan. I will watch stuff. I enjoy it, but I don't read everything. I can never do that because it's like putting too much information into this. It's like you want to have some of this stuff that's unknown. Like you're talking about like all the details that they have in Mad Max. Like they have the Tusken Raider looking dudes. As soon as he pulls up in his car, I'm like, and he says the I'm like, these are Tusken Raider guys. I understand what the vibe is here.
Yeah.
They're about to try to come and steal their stuff.
That you're talking about the Jawas, but I get what you're saying.
They are the Jawas. I don't know why I'm thinking prequels. That's why I grew up on the prequels. What am I supposed to say?
I think the Tusken Raiders were also in, I think, the sequel or the original trilogy as well. They were just
in New Hope. Yeah.
But no, I get what you're saying. But yeah, I just there shouldn't be a need to feel like to explain everything. What I really liked about the new Watchmen TV series, and there was a lot of stuff that happened in there that they just felt they didn't need to explain. Like the guy who like made himself like super slippery, ran through and just like jumped into the sewers. They never explained that at all. You know what? Good. I don't care, because if you give that dude a backstory, that dude's ridiculous. Give him a backstory and a meaning, it's even more ridiculous. Just having him be a part of the world and we get to experience him in the world for like 3 seconds and then he's gone and leaves you with a bunch of questions. I like that. Good film, good art is supposed to leave you with more questions and answers, which is something that Mad Max does and is super successful in.
I think there's a needle to thread here that you should have mystery, but if you have a mystery that your whole movie is like set up upon and you don't tackle that mystery, then it's a problem. I'm bringing a bit of therapy into here, but it's like Jordan Peele's Us. They talk about all these people, they're underground and all this stuff, and then they don't give any explanation as to why these people are down there. Is like there's some like government experiment or something like that. There's no explanation given there. And for me, for my mind, I was like, I don't know. Y'all could have given me one line and I would have ran with it, but it's like people like it. I like the movie too, but it's like that just it leaves a little bit of issue for me. But with Nope, he kind of does it right. So because like there's an alien, there's all this stuff going on, there's enough explanation, but it's like it's perspective. Like you said, we just need to know enough, but it doesn't need to be everything.
Yeah.
So what are some other details you had for production value?
If you want to get even more specific, the design of the cars, like the way that they've gone to make different cars serve different functions and look different ways. They're not all, the same, which makes sense in the environment they're in. I mean, even the detail to have a guy up there playing the guitar, instead of a war drums or a war trumpet, he's playing the guitars. That's their war, song. Little things like that just shows that, it makes sense that George is thinking of this since the 90s, because you have to let a story sit for a long time to really come up with these small details. But the best world building stories have these small details. You know, it has the things. Dune's been a great example of that recently. They have these small things where it's like, oh yeah, you can see that the director sat there and thought, not only how is the scene going to go, but like, how would a real person in this world be in this scene, and what would be there, and how would they react to him? What would be written on the walls? Who would be in the room? What type of plant would be in the room? What type of food would they be eating? You know, what are the customs? What are the cultures in this setting? And George thought of all those things, and it's with the difference between a movie that feels empty or feels bland and a movie that feels like there's a real world there.
And I want to give a special shout out to Colin Gibson, who is the production designer on this movie. He's Australian. There are a lot of Australians working on this movie, in front of the camera and behind the camera, obviously because George Miller is Australian. And literally the spiky cars, that sequence, that is actually it's based upon Peter Weir, like the guy who made Truman Show. It's based upon one of his movies that where they had the spiky vehicle stuff. He's like, okay, I'm going to put that in my movie. But it's not, obviously it's not his whole movie. But Colin Gibson, he and the entire, like the whole car team, there was probably a different team that fabricated all the cars, did a fantastic job. And listen to this is heartbreaking. This is in the little like making of thing that they tried to start production in like the early 2000s on this movie. They started making the cars. And then they're like, oh, production's a no-go. Chop up the cars. Oh. They had to chop up all the cars. And it's just like, he was like, yeah, we spent like 2-3 days just chopping up cars and like ruining all the work that we had done. And it's like, there's a lot of points where it's like, the engine's churning up. We're getting ready to make the movie. And then they get their legs pulled from right under them.
This movie's a great example, though, of how sometimes things going wrong or not happening when you want them to happen can be a blessing. That if this movie was made in the 2000s, I, without a doubt, don't think it would be as good. I think that we were at a point technology-wise and just the ability of what you can do on and off camera was perfect for 2015. So yeah, it was perfect for the 2010s because we were finally there. We were finally at a point where you could do things you couldn't do before. And George capitalized on that. I don't know if this would have been able to, was it shot on IMAX?
No, this wasn't shot on IMAX, but John Seal, he shot this on digital, and they're using like an RE camera for a lot of it. But some of the like stunt shots where they've literally got camera guys on the car strapped in, and then they're getting shots. There's a reason why there's 400 hours of footage for this movie. But those guys are literally using DSLR cameras, Canon DSLR cameras.
And that's why it's important, because this would have had to be done on film back in the early 2000s, and it would have not, some of those shots they pulled off would have not been available to them without having smaller, more portable cameras that you don't have to worry quite as much about breaking like you would with a film camera.
Yeah, we had Collateral and Star Wars and all that stuff that shot digital, but it looks good, but it's not fantastic. And even this movie, I think one of the great things about it is that this is not shot on film, but it kind of feels like it is shot on film because like the graininess that you get from like a DSLR or something like that, there's so much dust going everywhere, and it just kind of feels like it is film. We're not going to have that whole conversation, but it's like, it's a good thing that it does look like film.
Yeah. So Vikash, what was your production value scene?
I was kind of busting it already. It is the beginning of the movie, the whole part of like, oh, Furiosa turns off the road. She's not going to Gastown or Bullet Farm. She's just heading east. So it's like Morton Joe figures out that his breeders are gone, and they're like, praying to the V8, and they're like, oh, it's time to go. It's like, put him on the car. Like, you got to be healthy to do war. That scene right there, when they say like V8 or whatever, and that scene, I remember in 2015 just be like, oh yeah, this is it. This is the movie for me. It was very fast getting into this movie. But it's like they get strapped on, Guitar Man's over, everything is going on. But for me, it starts when she gets onto the road and the Tusken Raider guys I was talking about, they're coming to chase on Furiosa. And we see the war party just coming. And it's an aerial shot of like them firing the little like firework powder things. And we see where they are. We see where Furiosa is. We see the other guys turning in, coming to get in on Furiosa. And it's just like from that point on, you're into this movie and all of the stuff that they have in this scene. The car work, the insane stunts of like the guy, Morozov, he gets shot with the little 2 arrow things. And then he sprays himself with the shiny chrome stuff. He's like, testify. What or they don't say testify.
Witness me.
Witness me. It's like, and then Morozov, he jumps off with the little 2 sticks and he pounds the car with and it blows up. And it's like every single piece all your stunt guys, your camera team, the VFX, every single thing is there. And it's just, you're feeling the emotional moment of that. And it's just like, what is going on? And then afterwards, they're like, mediocre Morozov. And it's like, what is the culture of this movie? I don't understand any of this, but I am strapped into this movie. And Zach, we're not car guys, right? I was talking to Marley about this with Fast and Furious. We're not car guys, but we love this movie. Yeah. Actually, I was driving on 16 a couple years ago, like during COVID, and someone had like a Mad Max type car. I practically almost crashed staring at that man's car. Because it's like, it's so cool to see this stuff. Like, who thought of this? And it's like, it's almost a World War II thing where it's like they kind of draw on the planes. It's like everyone has their own little unique design. You know, at the end of the movie in the chase, the Interceptor, Max's car, like he's trying to get his car back even in that moment.
No, that was pretty funny. Yeah, and the thing is that whole scene you talked about leads to what I would say is one of the best shots I've ever seen in a movie, where you see...
He's talking about at 25 minutes and 19 seconds. I know what shot he's talking about already.
Talking about the storm, where they see the storm over there engulfing the screen. It's a wide shot, very wide shot of it. Yeah, even watching that for like probably the 10th time on my TV the other day, I was like, yeah, this is it. This is like amazing stuff. And I mean, I'm sure that's like mostly CGI or whatever they do to make that. But the way it's an incredible shot. It looks like a work of art.
The scale of it too.
The scale, that's the thing. You know, I compare it to like the Interstellar, that's not a mountain, that's waves type shot, you know, or I don't want to spoil the new Dune, but there's something that happens in there that's similar too. When you like the idea of like something you're looking at is bigger than what you thought it was going to be, or is just on a scale that's incomprehensible to us. It's just regular people. That stuff always gets me in a movie, and this was one of the best times I've ever seen that used.
Oh yeah, and literally they go into the storm, and there's tornadoes in there, and the cars are getting lifted up, and the color is like, it's turning from the orange to the like black and white, and it practically feels like a sci-fi movie. And there's no explanation to this. It's just you're pushed in, you're feeling all the thrill of the moment. And even before they get into the storm, Anne Harrod, splendid, Rosie Whiteley Huntington, like the main wife, she comes out. And it's like, oh, the tension is already high with these guys chasing them and the war parties coming behind them with Immortan Joe. And then she pops out and it's like, oh yeah, there's actually like, there's a reason why she's going this way. And she has the 5 wives with her and they're like, we can't breathe. And everything is just going crazy.
Yeah.
Nux, you know, he reverses the car and then he's driving backwards while like taking care of like the construction buzzard thing is like hydraulics. And when that thing explodes, I'm going to give it another one. 24 minutes and 34 seconds. Now, that's one of my favorite shots of this movie, too, where it's like everything blows up. It looks like chaos. But there's the one, like probably a stunt guy or a dummy that like falls off and just falls into the sand. One of the war boys. Yeah. I'm just like, what is this movie? Like, this is fantastic. And it's like he does a little slow motion even with that. And I think the music cuts out, too. And it's like every single one of those moments. It's one moment in this movie, but if you put this scene in a different movie, it would be the best thing about that movie. No one would be talking about any other scene in the movie. This would be their peak. This could be the peak of like someone's career. And he has this whole movie being the peak of his career.
Vikash, then what's your action is the juice scene?
So action is the juice. And I will say, I don't think we're going to hit another movie like this in the podcast for a long time, where I'm like, oh yeah, this entire movie is juice. No one can make something like this ever again. I hope to God that George has done this again with Furiosa.
I got good news for you. They are making it again. It's called Furiosa, and it'll be out very soon.
It's going to be coming out this week if you're listening to it the week that we put this out. But the heat so we talk about heat, but this is the real action of the juice is this movie right here. So as the storm that we're talking about happens, we see it fades away, and we open on Max, and he's in the sand, and he slowly rises out of that sand. He's just like shocked by it. They cut to like paint. It's just, you get put into his mindset, and there is barely any dialogue in the scene besides a couple like story beats to like tell you what's going on. But it's like, oh yeah, he tries to blow off Nux's hand. Can't do it. Okay, now I get to the truck. He gets to the truck, and we get revealed. We see all the wives for the first time cutting off their little chastity belts. An actual horrifying thing that George Miller saw in a museum and is like, this is the cruelty that men can do, and I have to put this in this movie. And he did, and it's a great detail to have. And obviously, it's like, oh, water. I need water. And it's like the entire time is barely any like dialogue. And then we get into the fight, obviously, where it's like it's Max fighting Furiosa. Furiosa comes at him with all of her force. And then Nux kind of gets in there. The wives are trying to pull off Nux, and it's chaos. But that chaos, you feel everything that's going on. It's like, oh yeah, the war party's coming. These are all the protagonists that are actually fighting right at that moment. But it's like, oh, we're fighting. So at the end of this fight, we kind of got to get on the same page as to like what we're doing. And I think that's the juice for this movie. It's like you could talk about a lot of other scenes where it's like the action is fantastic, but this is one hand-to-hand fight scene. And the tension is fantastic. The framing is fantastic. Geography of it, fantastic. There's nothing about this that isn't like, oh, they could have done this better or something like that. Nope. This is all just going and going and going. And it's a 10-minute scene. It's a 10-minute scene that I love. And Zach, listen to this. Furiosa's stunt double, she ate snails or something. They're living in Africa, shooting this movie for 10 months. And she got sick. She was sick during this entire fight. And the day they finished this, she got sent to the hospital for dehydration because she would go shoot this during the day, vomit all night, and come back, shoot it again. And then she was giving all that she had with this.
Jeez. I mean, this also feels like the first time that we get to see more about Furiosa as a character and Max as a character. This is the first time that we get to see them converse. We get to see, they fill each other out. They're not sure about each other. Max gets the upper hand and is able to kind of, use guns to basically convince them, like, I'm watching you, I'm keeping an eye on you. And eventually that fades away as they fight together. It's a good break.
Max is still a dog at this point. He's still like in his like fight or flight still.
Yeah, and you almost think it's a break from all the action you just saw, but then the movie just puts you right back in as Max is like having this very tense scene that keeps going back and forth with who has the upper hand. It's super well done, and I mean, it fits into the rest of the movie, really well about it just being pure juice.
You're right that it does catch everybody off guard, even narratively, where it's like Nux is knocked out. He's chained to Max. Most inconvenient thing. Furiosa, she doesn't have her arm on. She's caught off guard. The wives, they're caught off guard, right? Why would they be outside trying to get air if they didn't think that they were safe to some extent, right? So everyone's caught off guard, but it's like, it's this thing of like everything that can go wrong is going wrong. And it's like, you're trying to get everybody on the same page. And they do it well. I love it. And it's like Nux is the only one who was like kind of lagging behind where it's like, it's like, Immortan Joe is my god or whatever.
My action is the juice scene is not right after it, but it's a little bit, it's near the end of the movie. It's the way back chase with the pole vaulters when they decide to turn around and go right into the belly of the beast and go back to the Citadel. But specifically the part of it that sticks out to me, it feels like the culmination of all the action that we've seen in the movie when they bring the pole vaulters in. It's like, hey, you've seen all the cool stuff we've done so far. We're bringing in like a literal circus act, but that's trying to kill you. And the way and that's all real work. None of that CG. That is straight up like real stunt actors doing amazing work. And just the concept of having cars drive by that has these things that are going up and down, back and forth, just leaves me in awe every time I'm watching it, just from the idea of like, okay, maybe this is a little impractical in a fight, but from just appreciating stunt work, which I know you do, this is some of the best stunt work I've seen in a movie.
Guy Norris, he's the one who did the stunt coordination on this movie. And this scene, they essentially were like, oh, like George Miller has this idea and I'm going to send my sons. So Guy Norris, he sent his sons to this like Cirque du Soleil guy who was in America, I think, or he was in Australia, where he's like, they're doing a tour for Cirque du Soleil and they just his sons went and learned this stuff. And then they came back and they were doing it themselves or like teaching everybody how to do it. And Guy Norris, he talks about it as like, no one got hurt on this movie. There was obviously you're going to get bummed up. You're going to get bruises. You're going to get problems, but no major injuries happened on this movie. They were very safe with everything that they did. And that's not always the case, sadly.
No, it's not.
And actually at the end of the movie, when the war rig, at the end of this scene that we're talking about, when the war rig slams into the canyon, he's the one who performed that. He's like, this is the most dangerous stunt of the movie, where literally you could have 45 Gs coming at your body. And he was just like, I'm not going to let anybody else do this. I'm going to do this myself. So they shot this, and obviously very risky. It went well. And the cage that he was sitting in during the stunt, they cut it out. And the stunt team, or like the fabrication team, made it into a rocking chair. that he has in his house. He's like, that's the last stunt I will ever do in my life. I'm going to do coordination for the rest of my time, and I'm going to leave it at that. And what a way to go out.
That is. What a way. You're right, man. That is a way to go out.
Literally, he is nuts, like, witness me.
It really is just exceptional. Every action part and scene in this movie could just fit into this category. I mean, we could start from the beginning of the movie and just go all the way through if we wanted to for Action is the Juice, because it really does not stop.
I do want to bring up like one emotional like Action is the Juice scene, which is when they do go the one night's run all the way past the crows to the green place. They get there, all they see is the dunes and the tower, or Max is like, that's bait. And then the woman comes down, and then we see all the women come out, and they're the Volvolini of the society that the Green Place was based within, that Furiosa grew up in. We see Furiosa's best friend from when she grew up. That's the lady that's in the tower. Fun fact, Zach, she is actually the Wonder Woman that George Miller was going to have. And he was like, yeah, that didn't work out, but I still want to have you in a movie. So that's why she's in this movie as Valkyrie.
Oh, that's funny. Yeah.
Yeah. Her name is Valkyrie in this movie for obviously a real reason. Not, I mean, Valkyrie, and then we have Valhalla. There's, a lot of like mythic elements in here.
Also just the funny thing of just, that's kind of a Wonder Woman thing too.
It is. Yeah, very
but
much.
you got the shot behind you on the wall. I can, no one, anybody listening can't see this, but he's got it on his wall right there.
Yep.
Wait, what's the other one in the desert? That's not it too?
No, that's probably, which one? This one?
To the left.
Oh, yeah, that's the shot.
Yeah, you got two of them.
So what Zach is talking about how is in this scene, we figure out what's going on, and Furiosa for once lets down her very, head right mood where she's lost the hope that she's had for probably years of the Green Place, that it doesn't exist anymore. And all we see is her letting her arm off, letting everything go for a minute, and she just walks into the dune, and the wind is just going by in the sand, and we just see her agonize and scream. Junkie's score swells up, and we see like her juxtapositioned with the sun, and it's the most heartbreaking scene of the movie. That being said, Zach, there was a monologue here. They actually wrote a monologue for this scene, and then they're like, oh no, we don't need a monologue for this. They were shooting the scenes with the Volvolini, and then they're like, oh, the timing is right for the sun. So they literally ran up the dune, ran up the mountain of sand, and then just played it. Like, okay, set up the camera, like literally just plopped it down and rolled it. And Charlize turns it on as she always does right away. And it's one of the best moments of this movie. It's like, I have goosebumps just thinking about it. That's how great it is.
Yeah, my favorite shot of this movie is the, scene with the sandstorm. That would be my second favorite shot of the movie, when she does collapse into the sand and is looking down and feels defeated. That is an amazing shot and would be the best shot in a lot of other movies.
You feel the agony that Furiosa is going through, and it's not anything where it's like I said, they had a monologue planned. They were going to spell out everything that she's feeling, and it's like, you don't need to spell it out. What Charlize does with this movie every single step of the way is like, she doesn't spell anything out, but you know exactly what's going on with her, and she's just trying to get through her day for most of this movie. And it's one hellish time that they're having these few days. Where does she end up at the end of this chase scene that you were talking about? Like, she's bloodied up, literally has to get a puncture to like breathe in her chest, and she's given all that she can to try to probably redeem herself for the sins that she has had, working for Immortan Joe. And I do wonder, do you think she was she has the the insignia on her back, like, was she a breeder?
Yeah.
Was she somebody else? Like, obviously there's a movie coming out, but we don't know.
My theory, and I think the movie coming out will end up supporting this, is that she was a breeder and ended up being infertile. So she had to basically become a fighter for him to stay in his good graces and not be killed or cast out. That's my theory.
I don't know if you know this, but the youngest wife, she's the one who outside the truck, when they get out, the water fight scene that we just talked about, she's the one who runs back. She's like, oh, he'll take us back.
Yeah.
She was 14 or 15 when she shot this movie.
Really? She looked a lot older.
She looked older, but she was literally a child.
Huh.
And that was Miller's whole point.
Yeah.
Is that he literally has a child that he's using for this. And it's like, how disgusting is that?
Immortan Joe, not a good guy.
But let's get into dialogue so I can actually talk about that. So, Zach, dialogues.
Oh, God.
What piece of dialogue in this movie, in this pretty much dialogueless movie, Zach. What are the pieces of dialogue that have actually affected you? Please, come on, Mad Max.
I hope I'm not stealing the one you're about to use.
Nah, you're not.
Okay, well, I'm doing the end quote. It goes, "Where must we go, we who wander this wasteland in search of our better selves?" I'm going to be real. The first, however many times I watched this movie, I gave no thought to the end quote. I'm still in awe of what I just watched. I didn't give a crap. Like, oh, that's a cool capper. This time I thought about it, and I did something I don't usually do when I prepare for this podcast. I actually looked up and read other people's takes on this quote, because I spent good part of yesterday just thinking about it, trying to understand what he was trying to say here. So I've read a lot of different interpretations, and I finally decided on my own. I think it's a capper on the themes of the end of the movie, that there is nowhere to go except inside yourself, that you'll find redemption and become your better self. Because the quote asks, "We who wander this wasteland in search of our better selves, where must we go?" And in the movie, what do they do at the end? Instead of running, they turn around, they go into the belly of the beast, and they fight to redeem the Citadel, redeem themselves, redeem their people, to become a better person. They save others. And that's, Max's storyline, and that's Furiosa's storyline, where they may want vengeance, but they need redemption. And that's what I got out of that.
I think Max is a bit lost at this point, and it's like, I don't think he necessarily gets his redemption, but he gets redemption in the sense that he facilitated Furiosa's redemption. And it's like every single little moment counts. And the scene that I was talking about, how they meet at the green place, or the place past the green place actually, and they obviously run, they're like, oh, we're gonna go 160 days that way to the salt mines, and Max just, he's staring at them as they're going back, and he goes there with the motorcycle, gets in front of them, and he's like, there's nothing that way. Like, if you keep hoping and just keep going to like nothing, you're not gonna. It very much is like almost a life lesson, where it's like, oh, it's like you have to get through the negative emotions of like having to go back to this place where you don't want to go back to, but that is the most logical thing, where it's like, yeah, we might die trying doing this. It's better to do that than to just keep going in a direction where you have no hope.
Yeah, and it's, an inverse of the question, who killed the world? It's, how do you save the world? You don't save the world by running. You save the world by fixing, your community, fixing what you can in your area. And I think that's what he's getting at there, is that running from your problems is not a way to fix the world. It's to charge at them head on and to fix them.
And some people, they're like, oh, like this world is messed up, and like just our world. Obviously, this movie is a reflection of the world that we live in. And they're like, oh yeah, this world is messed up. All these problems are happening. And then I am just going to divorce myself from this world. I don't want to be with it, other humans. I don't want to talk to them. I don't want to associate with people I don't necessarily agree with, just because, but we're all humans with, all of our own baggage and all these problems. But this movie's like, that being said, you need to live within this world, or else you're the problem in the world. Because obviously there's people that probably don't associate with people. And obviously this, Mad Max is a crazy area solution of like, there's a lot of problems going on in that world that are very much fight or survive, like fight or die, fight or flight. So you have anything else for dialogues?
No, that's it.
I'm gonna go fun first, and then, get into the serious one. The fun stuff for me is always, it's all the details. It's like gasoline. There's a lot of like Australian stuff in this movie. So Furiosa is obviously coming out. George Miller took the movie back to Australia. It is the biggest budget movie ever to shoot in Australia. I think
bigger than Australia.
George Miller,
the Hugh Jackman movie.
Yes, actually like 5 times bigger. Where it's like he very much cares about his, where he grew up and how he grew up. And this story, he was a doctor. He did spend a lot of time like training and seeing a lot of trauma, even growing up, where he kind of got used to this stuff. And it's like the brutality that we see in this movie kind of reflects what he grew up with. Whether it's him saying gasoline, or whether it's Dag saying like Schlanger. She says Schlanger like 5 times, and it's hilarious. I don't know what it means. Actually, I do know what it means. Look it up. It's kind of funny. But there's all this Australianism, Aussie vibes in this movie, and I respect it. So let me get serious. Obviously, what a lovely day. Nick Holt gets a couple of the best like line deliveries in this movie, because I think he's fantastic. And obviously he's about to play Lex again. He's bald again. I didn't even think about it till this moment, but it's like, it makes sense actually. One of my favorite lines of this movie is when he says, "Witness me" at the end. And then it's just like, oh, like this is the actual like emotional thing. It's like, why are we actually caring about this war boy with his little like Randy and Taney or whatever his like 2 boils are? Like, this is what a good movie does. It's like, it makes you care about someone you don't necessarily expect to care about in the first place. So all those are fantastic. by my deeds, I honor him. V8. All that stuff. Obviously, it's like you just want to gravitate towards those. But the one that hits me the most is at the beginning of the movie, Immortan Joe, he kind of puts on his garb and puts on the mask, and he's like, I am your redeemer. It is by my hand that you will rise from the ashes of this world. And this man's like, oh yeah, I'm a god. Like, this is some like Kanye vibes in the worst way possible. And if you don't know this, the guy who played him, Hugh Keansburn, he was actually the villain of the first movie, Toe Cutter. Also, he was supposed to be Martian Manhunter for George Miller in his Justice League movie. So it's like, it's someone that he likes. And the big thing about him is he is a Shakespearean actor. So it's like, you know, he's got that gravitas. And I think he's obviously like this Vader-esque boogeyman in this movie. But you see as a character what Immortan Joe has done. Obviously, there's Bullet Farm, there's Gastown, but he's the one who's like water, milk, plants. He's the one who's always searching for life in this movie, right? And he sees himself as being the purveyor of life because he thinks that he's just like Jesus, like, bro, you ain't Moses. You ain't the one parting the seas. You ain't, you know, you're not helping anybody. And he has this charisma. He's got this long hair. He puts on all this makeup. He looks like a joke, right? But people are attracted to him. They want to be with him. They're like, oh, he's the one who's going to pick me up. He sees me. He validates me, and he's going to really bring me to salvation in Valhalla, right?
Yeah, because he presents himself as a messianic figure.
Oh, you mean Muad'Dib? Lisa Al Gai. I'm talking about Dune.
Oh yeah, Muad'Dib. Oh yeah. No, I mean there is a Dune comparison there where it's like, you know, this one's a lot more on the nose about it, but it's like, hey, you know, be careful of messianic figures. They actually may not have your best interests in mind. He figured out very quickly each of these different warlords control something that's important to the world they live in. You know, bullets are very important. Gasoline's very important. Water and life, you know, that's Immortan Joe's territory. He has stuff that's necessary to keep living. Water, you know, milk, like whatever he needs to have, and he probably trades with them. I imagine there's a trading system in there. And it's why all those are in power. All that's to say is, I don't know if he sees himself as like a godlike figure. I think he just presents himself that way because he knows that's how he has control.
This presentation of it. Immortan Joe, ultimately, he comes off as like, he, even with like the guy from Bullet Town, the guy from Gastown, he is a little bit better than those guys, even though they're all terrible men. Actually, no, Immortan Joe's the worst of them because he's the one who he wants viable progeny. He wants a boy to take over for him, right? And there's like incredible disrespect to women throughout this movie, and that's the whole point, is like that these men, this men-led society, even you can call it society in this apocalypse too, that they are all degrading women, whether it's like we're milking these women literally, we're trying to get kids from them, but we have no respect for these women at any point throughout this.
Who killed the world?
Exactly. And we don't even have to say it because we know who it is. And it's like this, I would hate to know what this man did if he had a baby girl before, these wives. And I'm sure he did. He puts up all this makeup. He does all this stuff. And it's a testament to like what a villain can do when he hails within theatricality and deception. What can you do? It's either you become Batman, you live long enough to become the villain. And it's like you can use all this theatricality and deception to actually brainwash people to like think that they're valued and prey on their insecurities. But it's like you're really getting into a person who's literally a rapist. He's far worse than a dictator. He took what the capitalist system was and he became the worst parts of it in the most blatant ways possible. Yeah. And that's what Immortan Joe is. And I don't talk about it. I don't think about this stuff when I watch Mad Max. Like you said, George Miller, he leaves all this there, presents it on a platter, and then he's like, do what you may. Just, this is just a little suggestion.
Yeah, subtext.
And I will say, you're talking about that line. You'll hear this line in the Inside Pod that comes out after this, but Zach had this line from this game where it's like, Mask of Humanity, fall from capital. It has to take it off to kill everyone. Everything that you love, all the hope and tenderness in the word. It has to take it off just for 1 second to do the deed. And you know who wears a mask in this movie? Who wears a mask in this movie, Zach?
Immortan Joe.
And what happens to him at the end of the movie? What happens to his mask?
Take the mask off.
They rip it off. Yeah. They rip off his face with it. And I saw this like direct comparison of like you talking about that quote. And I'm like, oh, they literally ripped off the mask of capitalist like entity that is in this movie. And I'm like,
It's like a reversal of the quote, really. It's like them taking, violence against,
oh yeah, it is.
the one that's been terrorizing them. This is like a world where the mask has been off, and it is off permanently. And every form of, I'm not trying to get all political, but every form of capitalism in this Mad Max world is about, bartering. And it's bartering people. It's bartering, the goods that people put out, and it's not giving them anything. I don't know how much George wanted. I need to see the other Mad Max movies. I don't know how George can say what type of critique of society he's trying to present across these movies. But there is a critique of society there, and I hope that if you watch it, you keep that in mind to see what George is trying to say.
And that's what a lot of good movies do. It's like, yeah, we're going to have these crazy situations, but we're very much still talking about our real world. George Lucas is on paper, on film, talking about I'm talking about the Viet Cong in Star Wars. This is a very political thing.
Yeah.
And for
Is
every
that
ounce
your
of
George Lucas accent?
That's what he sounds like in my head. George Lucas
kind of does
boss,
sound
though.
like that, though.
Yeah, he has a very very closed talk of what it is.
Oh,
but that being said, we might cut that out. But whatever. That being said, the Layla, the best needle drop or score use for this movie. Obviously, we're gonna go first to Doofman. That is the man hanging on his sling with his red outfit. I think the only red outfit in this entire movie, and I think he's got on like skater shoes. If I caught his soles correctly, I was like, aren't those Converse? But he's keeping the pace going. My two scenes I will say for the Layla, because I don't think you brought anything, is the sandstorm when it's like pulling out. And you see the storm, and he's got these vocals going, and it feels almost godly. It feels church-esque to where it's like, this is getting crazy. Like the entire piece of the sandstorm, if you look it up for Junkie XL for Mad Max Fury Road, fantastic. And then the last one, when Nux at the end of the movie, he's like, witness me. And I think this movie has a lot of very forward-moving music. There's a lot of drums, and you kind of expect it of the movie. But the tender parts of this movie, very good music. It's a thing where it's like you have to have both. If you don't have good music in one or the other, then it doesn't work.
Yeah, I mean, I don't have anything for this because I think the score just flows so well behind the gorgeous cinematography and action so effortlessly that it's really just one big piece to me. Nothing stands out because it all works in conjunction with what we're seeing on the screen so well. It never tries to take over and be the centerpiece of your attention in the movie. It's always in the background, but never in the background for a negative reason. It's just it works so cohesively with what we see on the screen. It reminds me a bit of how the scores aren't the same, but it reminds me a bit about how the score in Dunkirk is understated because it fits so well with what you're seeing. This movie also does that.
This movie is very heavily edited, and Junkie XL came on I think you said he worked 2 years on this movie. Typically, if you're scoring a movie, you might work 5 to 6 months. Some people have worked less, which is wild, but he worked 2 years on this movie, and it shows. I think he did Batman versus Superman after this. Not that I'm making any comparisons besides the music itself. Hans Zimmer's on that score, but in that score, Junkie did the Wonder Woman theme.
Yeah.
Junkie's music is very much flowing from this one into that one. Like there's a river that you can very much tell that this is coming from, but it's very much George Miller, Mad Max, Margaret Sixcool editing, and Junkie just kind of putting stuff together to represent what's going on screen.
Yeah.
Because there's just craziness. If you don't have dialogue, what's guiding your movie? It's the music, right? Like you said, it has to all work in conjunction. And if one's not working, then none of it's working. In this movie, it's working the entire time, overdrive. And this movie is maximalist at every point pretty much, except when it needs to be emotionally tender. Then it's like, oh yeah, we're going to pull back and we're going to have actual subtext to the emotional moments that you're having.
Yeah.
Because imagine this movie being like Max just being overly mad, or Furiosa being overly sad. If there's overly any emotion in this movie, it would not come off well, would it?
No, this movie is emotionally restrained, but is also maximalist in what it's showing you. It's an interesting pairing.
Only someone with a confidence within okay, I'm going to do it this way. And I'm not trying to listen to anybody unless I'm asking for their opinions. Obviously, he has so many collaborators, fantastic collaborators on this movie. And it's you have to know what that tune is for yourself. George is really that dude where it's like, oh yeah, I've got all this in my mind. I'm just trying to get it out. And I am grateful for whoever comes in my way and just trying to help me try to get this thing out there. Where it's like, I'm going to be very particular about what I need, but I'm going to listen to what everybody else has to say. And it turned out well, obviously. Like Junkie XL, still one of my favorite guys. He has done the score for Furiosa. We're recording this the weekend that Godzilla's coming out, and he just did Godzilla too. He's always doing big stuff.
I forgot there was a Godzilla movie coming out.
Don't worry about it, everybody. If you're listening to this, whatever year this is, go watch Godzilla -1. It's never gonna age. It is fantastic. One of the best movies ever made. You know who should have been in this movie, Zach? Come on, let's recast the role for the greatest movie ever made for me, or one of the greatest movies ever made. Mad Max Fury Road, Zach. Recast the role. Who are you putting in this movie?
So, I'm not putting Katie O'Brien in because I dare not replace Furiosa, but she would actually have been pretty good in this movie.
Maybe if Anya Taylor-Joy wasn't the younger Furiosa, maybe she could have,
or just
done
side
that role.
character. I don't care. Like, she's just got a physicality to her that I haven't seen in a actress in I don't know, ever. Like, she has such a physicality.
Oh yeah, I've enjoyed watching her in The Mandalorian among some other things, and she's just a cool human being, I'll tell you that.
Yeah. Okay, so I didn't want to replace most of the main characters because honestly, I couldn't think of someone who would do it better. Like, I thought about Tom Hardy for a while, and I was like, he was kind of perfect for what we needed, someone who could actually be the second guy, not be the lead. So my replacement is I would replace Nathan Jones. He plays Rictus Erectus. He's the big, dumb, muscle, heavy son of Immortan Joe. That would have been a perfect role for Dave Bautista.
Dave Bautista would have made it too funny, I think. He could thread that, but it's like Rictus is like hilariously, I don't want to make fun of the guy. Obviously, the character itself is like an emotionally or mentally stunted individual, but I understand it 100% what you mean.
Yeah.
I don't know. I see comedy I see everything within Dave Bautista.
He can do everything. Yeah, right? Like the new Dune, he's not funny in both the Dune movies. He's not funny in Blade Runner.
Yes, he is. What do you mean? When in the second Dune movie, he's the funniest. He's one of the funniest things. When he gets whipped down by Austin Butler's character and like kiss my feet or whatever, I am laughing in the entire time, man.
I'm not sure if that was the intent of the scene, but I get what you're saying.
No, it is. It is the intent. I will say that.
I always think of Bautista. I always just think back to the opening scene of Blade Runner.
Sapper Morton, yep. Have you ever seen A Miracle? And that's like one of the best line deliveries I've ever heard in my life.
That scene, for the rest of Bautista's career, I will always believe in him because of that scene. I don't know if anybody else would have been able to make that scene as good as he did. Like, that scene had no business being as engaging and putting you in the world and putting you into the mystery. There's no business being that good. But Bautista was able to bring something out of himself that I had not seen from him before. Always will ride for him. He would have been perfect in this movie. I know it's a small part. It's more of a funny part, but he probably would have been able to find something to pull out of that part that would have gave it maybe a little bit more depth.
Oh yeah, 100%. But I think anytime it comes to a villain in this movie, I think he's kind of, besides Immortan Joe, surprisingly, Immortan Joe's kind of like Hugh Keen's Byrne was, Shakespearean actor. Yeah. When you're on the stage, you're really doing this, you're really having these enunciated performances, but he's a very subdued performance. He's very much, you can see that this man, he's got a mask on, so it's like you see his eyes, and it's just, you see the terror within his eyes that he has this one thing that he's going for.
It gives it layers. It really does.
Okay, I'm a real side note this though. Hugh Keen's Byrne did pass away recently. Like he passed away during COVID. But during this movie, he created a culture. Charlize Theron was talking about it. It's like literally you'd see a shaved white guy, and if he was in town, just at the little town that they were shooting in on the weekends, and they saw him, they would literally get on their knees and start doing the salute. And every time he came to set, everyone would be like, "Hello, daddy. Bye, daddy." It's like he had his picture, like in the stunt gym, he'd have his pictures up, and he literally wrote letters in blood or something to the wives every single step of the way. It was very much like, it's not what's his name? What's the overacting guy? The guy in Morbius? Oh. Jared Leto. It's not Jared Leto method acting, but this was something where it's like he made a wholesome kind of vibe for the way that they were shooting these scenes. And they would literally be like, "Oh, he's 10 minutes away." And everyone start getting hyped. All the World Boys start getting hyped. It's like, "Yes, let's go. Let's go." And it's like, it takes a very specific person to try to make that sort of like, set that sort of fun. Obviously, they're in the sun. There's sand going everywhere. They're in the middle of the desert. It kind of sucks, but it's like he kept the theme alive of what Immortan Joe was. So it's just, I want to give that man his flowers, and I'm not recasting him in this. So, Mad Max, there's this animalistic quality to Tom Hardy. You can't replace it. But the only other person I've seen it do recently would be John Bernthal as Max Rottingowski. What do you think about that? He's the only one who could do that recently.
I like it. I think the problem is Bernthal has too much charisma.
Tom Hardy has charisma out the butt too.
But he knows how to turn it off. I've seen him do it in The Revenant as well. I've seen him do it in Mad Max. Like, I think he can turn it off. Maybe Bernthal can. I haven't seen it yet because he is just so charismatic, man. Okay, Punisher.
I will say, Origin, the most charismatic he's ever been. Because he's the love interest. Yeah. He turns it on. I'm not going to talk about it because I'm going to get emotional. Okay. So Margaret Qualley is one of the wives. I don't know which one.
She would be good for the youngest one because the youngest one didn't look young enough to me, but Margaret Qualley could pull off 16. Like she could pull that off.
She probably was 16 at that time because I think she's similar in our age and we were kind of in high school.
Yeah, she would have been about
college.
that. Yeah, that would have been a good one. Well, you know, one of the wives is Zoe
Kravitz.
Yeah.
And then it's Abby Lee, and then it's
a good
great.
Group.
So capable. She's played the one that falls in love with Nux, or kind of like, you know, they got something going on. That's played by Riley Keough. She is like Elvis's granddaughter, but like she's a fantastic actress. Everything that she shows up in, whether it's It Comes at Night, Logan Lucky, she's killing it across the board. And listen to this. Uma Thurman and Monica Bellucci were kind of like the people that George Miller was thinking about in the 90s. Think about Uma Thurman, like they literally drew her out in these sketches as like, oh, she might be Furiosa. Like that's how far it went.
She would have been Furiosa in the 90s. I could see that. I think she 100% made sense. Bellucci Uma Thurman had the right physicality to be Furiosa.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, you see it in, Tarantino pulls that out of her for Kill Bill in a way that you want to talk about female lead action performances. Holy crap, dude.
Goated, right?
That's one of the best ever.
And for the 2000s, whenever they didn't have a Max, they were like, oh, Mad Max, maybe we do Brad Pitt, and maybe Furiosa is Angelina Jolie.
Brad Pitt could have done it. He still would have been a little charismatic, and Angelina Jolie would not be able to do it.
No. She would have. Trust me.
I know. I just don't think it would have worked.
I'm a fan, and I think she has that like demeanor where she could really do it.
Oh yeah, I guess.
And maybe it's just George Miller saw he saw Mr. and Mrs. Smith. He was like, oh, these two are kind of good.
I think she could do that. I don't think she would be able to do the falling and crying in the desert. I don't think she can pull that off the same way that it was pulled off.
Charlize does it. No,
Yeah.
You're right about that. 100%.
Gosh, man, what a good cast.
So on to a renamed or new segment for us called Soapbox. Zach, do you have any soapbox takes about Mad Max Fury Road? Say them now or forever hold your peace.
Yeah, so I'm glad we renamed it because I'm about to just break it and do something completely different. So bear with me here.
Okay, George Miller.
In the spirit of the movie, I'm doing something completely different. So I have actually two questions for you, both different. And so my soapbox is going to be me asking you these questions, and I want to hear your answer. I haven't told him beforehand what I'm asking him. Vikash, I'm putting you on the spot here.
So hit me with these questions, Zach.
So is this the best feminist action movie ever made?
100%, because there's not enough made. This is probably one of the only ones that exists. Therefore, it is the best one because it is the best made movie, and it's the one with positive, actual feminist ideas, characters within the movie.
And not a cheap corporate version either.
The only thing that's working against this movie is that it's named after a man. That's it.
Yeah, and when I say feminist about this movie, I'm not just saying, oh yeah, Furiosa's in it and she's strong. It's a feminist movie. No, I'm talking about the themes of the movie. George Miller did set out to make this a feminist action movie. That's what I believe. He keeps asking the question, who killed the world? The women ask Nux, who killed the world? It's very direct. The war-hungry men killed the world. It's like a lot of the war, it's like the wars you see throughout history, started by men in power. George Miller is asking the question, who killed the world? The men killed the world, okay?
Men's ego, men's existence, like just not being able to come to an agreement leads to you trying to use weapons instead of your words to justify a means to say that this human's life is more valuable than my life or vice versa.
Yeah. And he shows how, the women are shown in the movie. They're also, like you said before, they're used for their milk. They're used for their offspring. This is a feminist movie. It has feminist themes in it. Feminism doesn't always just have to mean, yay, women are really strong and doing well in a movie. It is, we are discussing themes that are around women and feminism and that. I'm not explaining it great, but you guys, you should know what I mean. If you don't, I'm sorry.
Are you mansplaining feminism?
Yeah, I am. I'm mansplaining feminism. Yeah.
We are to an extent, but it's like we are genuinely trying to say that this movie is a feminist action movie, and it's become something of a bastion for that. And I hope to see more, because this is something where, yes, there's women that are practically androgynous. There's women that are scantily clad, but the thing that unites, there's older women in this movie, and every single part, every single facet of, women in age, women in background that we see besides, women of color in this movie, is that they have all suffered at the hands of the issues that men have caused and men have breeded into creating this wasteland, this hellscape that we see in the movie. And the opening of the movie, right away, before he says, "My name's Max," we hear the little, the radio thing about, the gasoline, nuclear fallout, all these things. Who did all this stuff? And obviously we see the answer of who it is.
Yeah.
And I do want to bring up that Eve Ensler, she's the playwright, author, feminist, activist, essentially, that wrote the Vagina Monologues. Obviously that name means something. You should look up her work. And she was working, okay, trigger warning for anybody listening. If you don't want to hear anything about sexual violence, you should hop off for about, 5 minutes. And she was, Eve Ensler was in Africa, in the Congo, working with women, or not working with her. She's around women that were in the Congo that were, victims of rape, and within systems of oppression, of sexual violence that were being put upon women. And we've seen these things happen throughout history, and sadly, they're still happening in this world. And she came in, she met with all the women. There was practically a class that she was having with all these women together. And this sort of dialogue, it's not necessarily anything that's written into the movie, but it gave every single one of those characters, all those actors, whether it's Riley Keough, Zoe Kravitz, Valkyrie, it's Abby Lee, and it's like all these women, all the wives, Rosie Huntington, like all the wives, and they get this authorship within their character of like, this is how I'm going to play the character. And I see the actual world where it's like, these things have happened, these things happen in real life, and we're going to kind of put it into our characters, but we're not going to like outwardly say these things are happening, but it's like, it helps your characters. And there was a point on this movie where even some of the stunt guys, they were skeptical of this. And Eve Ensler had them come and sit in on the class. And George even came to class. And George is like sitting on the ground, looking up at Eve Ensler and like just taking this, imparting wisdom from her about literally what he's trying to make this movie about. And there's something beautiful about that, where it's like, there's a lot of pieces in this movie of like people putting in their input on this and taking authorship, authority over what they're doing, their little part. And that authority and freedom, which obviously George Miller says yes to, is the reason why this movie works. If you don't have these elements in the background, they don't show up on screen. You need it in the subconscious.
Damn, I thought this was my soapbox.
My bad. Take it away, Ernie.
The second question I wanted to ask you, and we did talk about it a little bit beforehand, is this a Western?
Yes, this has to be a Western. This is a Western. This is an apocalypse movie. For anybody who doesn't know, or no one knows this, me and Zach, we argue about this a lot, where it's like, it's like her. Is her a sci-fi movie? And I'm like, for a lot of years, I was like, no, that's not a sci-fi movie. That doesn't exist within sci-fi. Then I rewatched it a couple years ago. I'm like, dang, I gotta admit that I'm actually wrong about this. But it's like those sorts of elements, your mind necessarily doesn't always think about it, but it's like once you watch them, you're like, isn't this kind of a Western? This is a lone hero kind of coming in, facilitating redemption, having this happen. And then he's like, okay, cool. Y'all good? I'm out. I'm good. Bye. And that's what this movie is.
So those two things combined, is this a feminist Western action movie? And if it is this the only one?
This is a post-apocalyptic feminist Western action movie, and is the only one of its breed thus far.
Yeah. So that's the point I was trying to make. This is a unique movie, not just because of what's on screen, but the genres that it's pulling from.
My favorite movies of all time, they're always movies that have multiple genres. You talk about Back to the Future, you talk about Django Unchained, you talk about a lot of the movies that we've been talking about on this podcast thus far, is like they go into multiple genres. You talk about Terminator 2. We call it an action movie, but it's kind of got this heart to it. It's got the sci-fi in there. There's all these things going on. And it's like, if you don't have everything going on, then it doesn't work. So it's like, yeah, you might have an action movie, Bourne, action movie. But it's what? Spy movie, right? You talk about John Wick. John Wick, action movie, but it's kind of a crime movie, right? You're playing a lot of stuff there, right?
Yeah.
With like almost mafia thing. It's like Godfather-esque. There's a lot of like, there's a secret society going on, and there's different elements. You want to mix together all those genres. That's how you get a good pot.
Yeah.
That soup gotta be cooking that way.
Maestro, a bad movie that's also a biopic. That's a mixture.
So my soapbox take, Zach, is that this movie, despite the studio system, was made, and this is a lesson to every single studio head or anyone to come or anyone in the past, that take the risks and they don't always have to be calculated. You cannot tell me that, oh, let's go make Morbius. I'd rather go see a failed Mad Max movie than a Morbius. And I'm not just trying to dunk on this movie, a Morbius or something like that. I think Chris Stuckman, he made a video about Madam Web, not bashing that movie, but bashing the system at which these studios are making movies. And George Miller's this crazy genius, and he talks about his process in the movie system, like the studio system, how he got money to make a movie because he just made a movie that made good money at the box office or it got accolades. But then he'll run into a problem with a producer. He'll run into a problem that like, oh, I made a new movie and it bombed, so now they're not going to give me money. And I'm going to draw like a direct correlation to what happened to Damien Chazelle.
Mm-hmm.
This man has gone bar for bar for bar for bar, 4 movies in the studio, or 3 movies at least in the studio system, bar for bar for bar. And even though Babylon wasn't a success, it was a fantastic movie, and now they don't want to give him money. I'm not, being like, oh, boo-hoo, like these men are not, they, of course they're successful, but it's like, it's just as a industry, like it makes no sense that they're doing these things. And it's like, yes, take the risks, but make them like actual risks. Because if you don't take this all the way, you're never going to find greatness. And the greatness that you find within Mad Max is some of the greatest greatness I've ever seen in my life. And I'm scared we won't see this again.
I don't have a lot to add to your soapbox besides that I agree with you. There's a lot of directors that end up in director jail after they made maybe, a couple bad movies, or not even bad movies, movies that don't make money. And so they end up having to resort to making IP movies until they can get the trust of studios again, or they end up having to make very small movies which can produce some good stuff and then, eventually make a good movie again. But that's a lot harder road. I think you almost saw this with Dennis, actually, Villeneuve.
With Denis Villeneuve.
Denny, sorry. For Denny, he's French-Canadian. Because if you think about it, Blade Runner, I think, kind of failed at the box office, right?
Bombed.
And so
yeah,
he was lucky enough that, he probably could not go make something else after that was original work. But he was lucky enough that he had Dune sitting there and was able to convince the studios to make Dune. And now I'm sure after Dune 2 and, eventually I assume there'll be a Dune 3, he can make whatever he wants at this point, I would imagine. He's gotten enough credence in the studio system. Christopher Nolan had to do the same thing. He didn't have the failures early on with his movies, but he had to put out a lot of IP movies before the studio was like, okay, you know what? We will let you do whatever you want now.
We're about to watch for Pat's like commentary pod. We're about to watch Insomnia, and he went from The Following to Memento, which is still independent movie, and then he went to Insomnia, which is his first studio movie. And I haven't rewatched the movie yet, but I was like, yeah, he had to make this movie he didn't write to get a Batman. And then after he did 3 Batmans, in between he made The Prestige, he made Inception, and it's like, who's supposed to? How do you make Batman Begins, The Prestige, The Dark Knight, Inception, The Dark Knight Rises, and then go to Interstellar, Dunkirk, Oppenheimer, Tenet, Oppenheimer?
It's an all-time heater.
And it's like Greta Gerwig. Yes, she's making The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. I understand people's apprehension to it, but I'm like, let her make this big budget movie. She just made Barbie, and then she's gonna hit us with some fantastic work outside of this that I'm looking forward to. Ryan Coogler just made 2 Black Panthers. Yeah, but this man is making some vampire movie now with Michael B. Jordan. Are you kidding me?
No, that's a good point.
I've already paid for my ticket. You've already got my ticket because I love you.
Greta's a good point that, she had Lady Bird, okay, yep. Did well, gets her on the map. Guess what? Next thing she does is Little Woman, right? I don't know if that's a studio movie, but not and it's kind of IP. It's something she wants to do. Okay, now the last 2 what were the last 2 movies she's done? Or no, she's doing Barbie, and then she's doing Lion, Witch, and the Wardrobe. She's being smart here because what she's doing is she's getting herself, as much as I talk shit about just only doing IP movies on this, podcast, she's doing the right thing to where she's building up a trust with these studios to where when she finally wants to go make her own original story that's not IP based, which she will do, I promise you, she's going to have the backing of a studio. They're going to give her the patience, they're going to give her the time, and whether it goes right or goes wrong, studios are not going to lose faith in her. And I think that's the right way to do it.
And she literally made she made $1 billion movie. And it's like, if you made a movie like that, I don't know what her back numbers were. I don't know if she had the power as a director to get box office numbers. I think Margot Robbie might have made more money than her because she's a producer. But, that's her working on her back, and Margot puts in the work for it. But it's like, you have to have that sort of relationship. And George Miller never really got that. He got it to certain extents, and they'll be like, oh, Universal. He went to 4 studios to make this movie. They tried to make this at Universal for $100 million. They backed out of it. He tried to make Contact, which Bob Zemeckis ended up directing, but he was in pre-production. They were about to shoot the movie pretty much, and they fired him because they're like, oh yeah, we want him to be creative, but we don't want him to be this creative. They're like, oh, we want to do something really big with this movie, but then they want to nerf him on it. It's like, why are you going to keep this man on a leash?
Yeah.
You have to be able to take the risk with the people that actually do it. And obviously he did this. He made Mad Max Fury Road, and it's like he's proving everyone wrong. He literally went to court with Warner Brothers to get back-end numbers, like back-end earnings that he wasn't paid for Mad Max Fury Road. And then they paid him a $200 million budget or whatever to make Furiosa. And it's like, it's because he finally has this pull, and no one gets this pull. And I don't think even if Furiosa bombs, they wouldn't even give it to him again.
I don't even think he has the pull, to be honest. I think the only reason they let him do this movie is because how much of a success Mad Max was. He did his, I don't even remember what it was called, but he did a movie last year, right? That didn't do numbers.
3,000 Year Longing.
I can promise you after Furiosa, if he doesn't make another Mad Max movie, he's not going to get the budget. At this point, they don't trust him outside of that, which is bullshit, but it's what's happening.
It's crazy. And that's because Mad Max at the Oscars, they surprisingly, it's like you watch a movie, you're like, oh, they should win a lot of Oscars for this or something like that. Obviously, we don't see the Oscars as, live all or end all, but I would hope that they get it right. So, Zach, that being said, hit me with the Oscars conversation for this amazing, epic, show-stopping, every other adjective in the movie, spectacular, whatever it is. What happened in the Oscars in the 2016 Oscars for the 2015 movies?
That was an A+ transition. Just want to give you credit for that. You're kind of, you're like Furiosa navigating the desert, trying to get us to our next category. Okay, there is a few things I want to call out. I just kind of scanned the Oscar list. Let me tell you first what they won, and then let me kind of tell you some of the thoughts I have.
Oh, there's a big one that we're about to give them so much.
But let me
crap
just
for.
tell you the nominations and the wins, and then we'll go through and talk about it. So nominations. So ones they were nominated but did not win: visual effects, best picture, directing, and cinematography. The wins, 6 of them, came in the following categories, all below the line: sound mixing, costume design, makeup and hairstyling, film editing, sound editing, and production design.
Fantastic. I think we both remember watching these Oscars, and
I was
like, what I was rooting for? I was like, Mad Max or bust. I do not want anything else to win. Y'all are already on this BS that y'all didn't nominate any actors or anything, but it's like, this is something that I already know in 2015 that this is cinema. You went instant goated. You know how hard it is to make an instantly classic movie, and it's been 9 years and I'm still talking about this movie.
So if we want to talk best picture, I'll just tell you what was nominated. It's a decent list. Spotlight, which won, Big Short, Bridge of Spies, Brooklyn, Mad Max, The Martian, The Revenant, and Room. Not a bad list. Like, The Big Short's really good, Bridge of Spies really good, Spotlight maybe not as good as those other two, but still pretty good.
Bro, I love Spotlight. I'll tell you that.
But it's still like the 3rd or 4th best on this list. That's what I'm saying. It's a good year.
True. Okay, I understand that, but I'll fight for that.
Oh,
I understand why that won Best Picture, but it's not. It's Mad Max.
So a few notes from this year. The Revenant took a lot of Oscars from it, from what I noticed. It happened, like directing, stuff like that, cinematography, stuff that probably should have gone to Mad Max. Went to The Revenant. It's not a movie anybody's thought of since it came out. It did look really good, but it didn't have the same substance that Mad Max
And this
had.
is me threading the needle that I was talking about before, that just because a movie was hard to make does not necessarily make it the best movie.
Good point.
Yes, I understand y'all went to the depths of everywhere. Y'all were trying to chase the Snow and the avarice of Alejandro Gonzalez Iñárritu and his planning did not make it work well. That was a different situation than what happened on Mad Max. And I don't think he was a better director this year. I think obviously we're being subjective about artistic endeavors, but this man, it's like, you did not do what George Miller did, and no one else could do what George Miller did. And that's the sort of unique sort of performance as a director, as a coach, as a leader that you want to commend. And think about how many people won, how many people worked with George Miller that won. Colin Gibson, he's a production designer. If you look up the rest of his filmography, you're going to be like, I've never seen any of these things. Not to be, decorative to Colin Gibson, but it's like, this man knew what he was doing, and he pulled up and worked with some fantastic people that are either doing great work in other avenues or they're just, existing. So George Miller, man, he should have won that directing Oscar.
No, he definitely should have. Let me tell you about some of these for Best Actress, because this was a real problem, and I think that this movie came out today, we would have seen Charlize get a nomination.
No.
I really do.
I don't have faith in them.
But
I don't have.
Let me just read this list, because it's not. I mean, a couple of them were good, but okay. The nominees.
I've seen all these movies.
Saoirse Ronan for Brooklyn. I mean, not a notable performance from Saoirse, in my opinion. And
it's
I love
good.
Saoirse.
It's really good, but I think I've emotionally I've had more connection to her in other movies.
Yeah. Charlotte Rampling for 45 years. Never heard of that actress or that movie.
In Dune, it's the main Bene Gesserit mother. That's Charlotte Rampling.
Okay. No, I know you're talking about it. It's just like it doesn't change anything for me.
Andrew Haig, that's his movie. 45 Years is fantastic, actually.
Okay.
So she deserves to be there more than Saoirse or Jennifer.
Oh, yeah, I was about to say Jennifer Lawrence for Joy, which...
We're not going to talk about that director because I will literally pull out my hair, but we will keep going. I love Jennifer Lawrence, but she should have been nominated for Mother instead of this. And I think Mother is still the best performance she's ever given.
Yeah.
Carte Blanche.
Yeah, Kate Blanchett. See, fucking me up. Kate Blanchett for Carol. I mean, that one's actually a deserved nominee. She did great in that. And then Brie Larson won for Room, which I don't have any problem with. But what I'm saying here is there's at least 2 or 3 people here who could have been removed for Furiosa easily. And that was a mistake on the Oscars to not put her into that
She
part.
should have won.
Assuming she was running for Best Lead Actress. If she was running for Supporting Role, I don't want to go through it all, but it's a more stat category.
That's a lead role.
It is.
And if they try to do some, whatever category fraud or whatever, that's on them. But she's 100% the lead of this movie. And like you said, I like Rampling in 45 Years, fantastic movie. Carol, like Blanchett, fantastic. Brie Larson, really good in The Room. But the one that I keep coming back to, the one I've seen the most, not necessarily like you talk about it more than I do. I love rewatching stuff, but the role that is really seeped into culture, the one that is memorable, that is the one that stands as a bastion of like what we want to represent 2015 as being, it's Furiosa. Like, there's nothing else that makes sense in this, for a win for me. I'm not arguing anybody else for this.
If you want to see us talk more about who should have won previous Oscar years, go check out our 5 and 10 year Golden Pursuits podcasts, which are on our feed now, released in March.
It's very much this conversation, but it's even better because we're not just sitting here talking about specific movie, where it's like we have the time to say like, yeah, it's been this many years and we should have had this instead. And those sorts of, time is always the teller. And it's very rare, like I said, that you have an instant classic movie like George Miller's Mad Max Fury Road.
One last thing on the Oscars before we move on. For cinematography, I just want to tell you who was nominated because this is a great list. So
amazing list, actually.
It's an all-timer. So Sicario, Roger Deakins.
Goated.
God, I would have been okay with that winning too. Mad Max Fury Road, John Seale.
Goated.
The Hateful Eight, Robert Richardson.
Goated.
Carol, Ed Lockman.
Goated.
And The Revenant, Emmanuel Lubezki.
Chivo, goated on goated. This man literally won 3 Oscars back-to-back for cinematography. Gravity, Birdman, and then The Revenant. Yeah, 3 back-to-back Oscars, and then he dropped off the map.
Yeah,
but Johnny Seale, this is the first time I'm making a podcast recommendation on the podcast. He did an episode with the Deakins podcast, where John Seale talks about his career. One of the most illustrious cinematographers out there if you look up his career. And I got a funny line for you. He said that they shot 400 hours of footage for this movie. And he's like, it's almost like, if you compare it to film, I shot like 2 million feet of footage for Albert Brooks's Spanglish. Like Adam Sandler and Penelope Cruz's Spanglish. And if he has this like great Aussie, like Australian comedy to him. And it's just like, he's just a cool human being. And this man is in his 70s being the DP for Mad Max Fury Road. And that's his last movie. He's like, I'm retired now. He didn't come back for Furiosa. But think about that. That is the way to go.
That's
out.
a mic drop, man. Just like, I'm done. And I don't blame him. You might as well quit while you're on top. I do not blame him at all.
And he was on top in his 70s, man.
Yeah.
Like time, like it's like that line from Skyfall. It's like age is no guarantee of excellence or whatever.
Yeah.
So legacies through the prism of time for this movie. It has been 9 years. Does anything pop up for you, Zach? Whether it's the people in front of the camera, behind the camera, how's everything aged for this movie?
I mean, but this whole podcast, we've talked about how wonderfully this is aged because it is such a unique action movie. One thing I wanted to note is that this really established Charlize as a more dynamic actress, that she can not only just do dramas, but she can also do this action type roles. And by the way, she can do comedies. The Long Shot, she ended up doing that. I think it was 2020 or 2021.
A Million Ways to Die in the West.
Yeah, that too. She's really one of the most versatile actresses that we have. She doesn't really get the love that other actresses who are maybe less versatile do. But you could put her into almost any movie and she would find a way to make it work. And this was, I believe, the beginning of that multi-dimension, skill set that she now has.
And just like I was talking about John Seal, that he's getting better with age. Charlize getting better with age, that after this, she did The Old Guard, Atomic Blonde. I'm not going to ask Zach about his opinions about those movies, but it's like what Charlize does for her craft is fantastic, and it shows up. And it's like, you're just reading the behind the scenes stuff. She just cuts it on. There's no, I got to be in character for this. She's just really that good at her job. And I think it's like Jamie Foxx, where they're both not necessarily, they both have Oscars somehow, like early 2000 Oscars. And now they're just like, we're going to do what we want to do.
Yeah.
And I don't need another Oscar necessarily. I'm just trying to make good movies.
Yeah, they got it out of the way early.
They're not cursed by it. They're rather freed by it, that they can go and do these things. They can make crazy zombie action movies or comedies or whatever they're doing with their careers. And they've got me sad. Charlize, anytime besides her with the dreads in the Furious 8 or whatever it is, besides that, I'm always there for her. And it's not like she didn't do action before. She was in Italian Job, but that's very much almost like she has a very crucial part in that, where she plays Donald Sutherland's daughter, and she's the main woman lead of the movie. But Furiosa, this role is solidified in culture, that this is what we want to say. When I was growing up, when I was in college, that is that role. I will fight for Furiosa's that woman. And that's why we have another movie coming about her with a woman that we all love, which is Anya Taylor-Joy. Obviously, we have Furiosa coming.
Yep.
Furiosa, a Mad Max saga, coming to theaters this week. If you're listening the week we released this, and I've got a bone to pick for the legacy. If you see the CGI in Mad Max Fury Road, this is a very expensive movie, but there's a lot of noticeable CGI. And people saw the trailer for Furiosa and they're like, oh, this CGI is bad, or they need to improve the CGI. I didn't see there was backlash. It wasn't like that, but people were criticizing it. And I'm just like, did y'all not watch Mad Max Fury Road? Do y'all know what this man is capable of?
Yeah, and can you not give the man who made one of the most significant action movies of the 21st century a little bit of the benefit of the doubt? I hate the trend where it's like, oh yeah, I'm smarter than this guy. This trailer looks like shit. It's like, this guy has made movies that you can't even dream up in your head, and you're criticizing the CGI in the trailer. Hey, if it turns out to be a bad movie, guess what? We were wrong. But can you not give him a little bit of,
Even if the movie turns out to be dog crap, if it is the worst movie of all time or something like that, I'm still in that theater. I'm still watching this movie. I'm still respecting whatever they've done, because I would rather take a full swing and it be a miss, rather than half a swing that is nerfed by whatever the system is trying to, pull out as being something that's always marketable to like this audience or that sort of thing. We're not worried about stock prices here. We're worried about the art. And so is George Miller.
Yeah.
And it's
I
like
agree.
respect what they're trying to do here.
Yeah, definitely. I agree exactly what you're saying. More movies should take that big swing because, you know, if you're just going to make safe movies, you're going to make forgettable movies. And if you want to make something that's truly great, you got to take chances. And George continues to do that throughout his movies. And this new one will be the same. Whether it works or doesn't work, it doesn't matter because he's putting his all into it.
And this really is that blank check movie for him. There's another podcast called the Blank Check Podcast, but this is really the blank check movie here, where it's like you already made the goated movie, but what are you going to do after that in the same universe? You're going to make he wants to make another Mad Max Wasteland, like a sequel to Fury Road, which we're not really going to talk about because we don't know what's going on with that really, besides them like writing it. But it's like here, it's like we know what's going to happen. And I will gladly be wrong if the movie's not good, but I think it's going to be something to behold. And if you release Mad Max at a different time, like Fury Road, it doesn't necessarily get all the accolades it did. It's not, I don't know. It's like this movie, it depends on the audience that's seeing it. It's like, are you willing to really give yourself to like this amazing piece of cinema?
Exactly. It's, you know, it's whatever. You know, internet's gonna internet.
I will say, legacy-wise, Jason Boland, the guy who is the still photographer for this movie, all these years, he's still been posting, like, you know, making of photos for this movie, and they look so drastically different. Just the coloring of this photos from, like, what's actually there today to what's actually in the movie, and I always love seeing that. A couple like fun little facts. Riley Keough, who is one of the wives, Capable, she married Doof Guitar Man. So they're still a real life couple. And that happened with a few people in this movie because they're, you know, it's almost like COVID where it's like they're stuck in a small space together and it's just things happen. I will say Tom Hardy, a lot of mask rolls after this, wasn't it, for him? He did.
Was this the start of it or was the Dark? No, it was the Dark Knight Rises was the start of it.
Dark Knight.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But he does do a lot of mask stuff. You know, I think he has that Brad Pitt thing where he's too pretty to be like a method actor or be like a fun, gets into the role type guy. So he tries to find ways to make himself ugly or to contain himself or be dumb or find ways to get around the fact that he's like a good looking dude. Like, I think that's a real thing.
Yeah.
And both
But
those
I think
guys
he's really talented.
Yeah, both those guys are talented, but they constantly try to find ways to either A, play into their type, like Tom Hardy does in Inception, you know, very charismatic, but also B, they like to find ways to play against type, where him with the mask and all these movies where you can't see his face. He's a movie star, but you can't see his face.
He hits it well. It's like even in Dunkirk, it's like I think he's the most charismatic person. And he literally has his mask on majority of 99% of his runtime. We get just a couple like memorable shots of him without the mask.
Yeah.
He commands like Hugh Keansburn, who plays Immortan Joe. They both command just with their eyes, like their facial movement really commands such a performance where it's like, yeah, this is how you want to have actors. If you got to nerf them somehow, take away their face, that's how like these guys are the best at it. I will say the one last thing for legacies. You know the Canyon, they're the guys that are on the bikes. The guy who plays their leader, the Rock Rider leader, he's actually a stunt coordinator now. Stephen Dunleavy, he's a stunt coordinator now. He worked on John Wick 4 and Ballerina. So like, you know, the dragon breath scene with the shotgun, the stairway scene of the dude rolling down and all that sort of stuff. He's a guy who is, you know, the stunt coordinator for all that stuff. So it's like this movie, it's definitely, you know, a stepping stone for people to become even better at what they're doing, and it's great to see it. Where it's like, I'm like, oh, if I see Guy Norris's name, the guy who did Second Unit and all this, he's the main stunt coordinator on this movie. I'm like, oh yeah, I gotta watch this now. I don't even know whatever random thing it is, I gotta watch it. That being said, behind the camera or in front of the camera, Zach, who is your MVP for this movie?
Oh shit, I need to do Duolingo.
Oh, the notification came up on your phone, bro.
It's almost midnight. 1 second. This will take 2 seconds. I don't have a streak freeze. 1 sec. You can keep this in. I'm kidding.
Guys, it's currently 11:53. A little bit into our process. If you've really made it this far into the Mad Max podcast, I really appreciate it because I'm talking about one of my favorite movies of all time. And it's like when you talk about something like this, I could have a whole other conversation about this movie because we're not going to cover everything in there, but we really do love this thing. And I have it on my Letterboxd top 4. I was literally watching the movie again and I had to go to Letterboxd. I was like, this is on my top 4, right? I was like, this movie is a part of my DNA somehow. So all love to this movie.
So, my MVP, I went back and forth on this because can I just cheat and give co-MVPs? Because I'm struggling.
I have co-MVPs too. I feel like
Okay,
they
what
better
about
be the
this?
same ones.
I'll just take one and you take the other one. You got it? So,
Okay.
I think that the MVP of this movie is George Miller. To have the vision for this
Sexist.
movie, I'm just saying, to have this is a movie that you clearly have to have vision for. Again, visionary. Don't want to use that lightly. George Miller had the vision to make this movie. It's an incredible undertaking, and it takes someone who can look at just, a desert and just see things that we can't, who can see a movie out in the desert, out with these people, these actors and actresses who have no idea what's going on. And you have a script that's really just a storyboard without a lot of dialogue. He can see all that and he can put it together with a great team and come up with, one of the most influential action movies of all time.
And it's rare that you have talents like that. And I think they're either sitting in a room alone, like Bo Burnham in Inside, which is kind of the next episode we're releasing after this. But it's also people like George Miller who do get the opportunity to work with amazing people and give them sort of the freedom and the ebb and flow of like giving them freedom, but also, keeping them in the sandbox that he's trying to, make this movie in, that this comes out as being one of the greatest things that's ever been put to film. And it's not just me saying that. It could be Edgar Wright, Bong Joon-ho, one of your favorite directors. And when it becomes someone like that, especially with a new movie, a contemporary movie, that is saying something. Because someone like Bong Joon-ho, who's like one of my favorite directors, he literally, on his like Sight and Sound list, top 10 movies, influential movies, whatever for him, Mad Max is on that list. It's on my list too, because it's like, if you didn't watch this and go like, if I had to make something, like I would hope to make something that's even 10% of this, then you're not living in the vibes, because this is the vibe. Like, you want to be this crazy. You want to be this crazy, but somehow orchestrated. It's like, how do you make chaos that's also orchestrated, but it's also kind of anarchy, but it's kind of not? It's like, it's a paradoxical thing that this movie exists. It's a studio movie, but it doesn't feel like a studio movie. It's extremely artistic in a system that's not artistic at some points, but this movie is fantastic. And even in genre, where it's like, this is an action movie, and typically action movies, for the history of action movies, it's a lot of male leads, and this movie is like, no, yeah, we have a male lead name, but no, we're not going to do that. He's not the lead. Furiosa is the lead. Charlize Theron is the lead of this movie. So George Miller understood all that, and he's like, he kind of let the zeitgeist kind of come into the room and actually exist within it. It's kind of like what McHugh did with like having AI as the villain for the new Mission Impossible stuff. It's prescient, but it's also relevant.
All right, I know what your MVP is. Go ahead and give
the
it to me.
MVP for this movie is the wife of George Miller, the amazing South African raised Margaret Sixel, that won an Oscar for editing. And I think this might be the most deserved editing Oscar of all time, honestly. Like, that is the level of editing that exists within this movie, in my opinion.
You caught me off guard. I thought you were going with Charlize Theron for Furiosa.
Nah.
Oh, I didn't even think about editing. You are right. This is probably one of the best works of editing. Funny enough, I would put that with the recently released Oppenheimer in terms of like what the body of work to edit something like those two projects was.
No hate to Jennifer Lame, and she 100,000% deserved her Oscar. And there is a reason why, Thelma Schoonmaker, obviously Margaret Sixel, Jennifer Lame, there's so many women that are fantastic editors. Everyone from Justin Lin to J.J. Abrams to Martin Scorsese, a lot of women are editors, because as much as we, as men might have these ideas, they're the ones who actually forge it into existence. And Margaret Sixel had not edited an action movie before, but George even praises her for like, I know that she's not going to sit around. Like, she does not like slow pacing. She does this stuff, and she's the one who's sitting. They shot for 8 to 10 months. She's getting this footage, and they ended up with 400 hours of footage. 400 hours. That's so much. And she's the one who went through it, and they edited this thing for years, and they didn't have a beginning or end of the movie. The reason why is because Warner Brothers, one of their executives, like literally went to the set of Mad Max in Nambia in Africa and shut down the movie. they were like, they've literally nerfed them at that point. And then they had studio head change, like Kevin Tushijara. He came in, saw it, is like, okay, I'm gonna give you the money to finish this movie. And then in like 2014ish, they like shot the beginning and the end of the movie at the Citadel. But imagine having just the middle of the movie and then no base of like a starting point or an ending point.
That's true.
And it's like, she's the one who put this into existence. They're the ones who's sitting in the editing room like, oh, let's add this young girl throughout the movie, whether it's the opening of Max getting chased or him fighting Furiosa at the war rig after the sandstorm every single time, or in the third act of like him getting a shot with the arrow every single time that girl comes up, or I guess is supposed to be his daughter to some extent, is it's just adding detail to this movie where that detail wasn't there.
It's not supposed to be his daughter.
Or it's essentially like one of the people that got away, one of the people that died, and he feels responsible for her death. And it's like the editing for this movie, every single trick in the book, whether it's slowing it, speed ramping it. There's a point at the beginning of this movie where Nux headbutts somebody in, and they literally have like a white frame there. And it's just little tricks like that. They cut to paint when Max is coming out of the sand. There's so much editing in this movie. Just because it's a lot of editing, is it good? No, it's because this editing is giving you pace. It's giving you the energy. There's so much editing, compositing. There's so much work done in this movie after they shot the movie. It's atypical, and this energy does not exist if Margaret Sixel and probably like the editors under her are not there trying to forge it up into existence. I think George Miller would agree that if his wife wasn't there, if she's not the one editing this movie wouldn't exist in this form. And it's like, I think she's the person who really put this movie together. And it's like George's crazy genius and then her crazy genius as an editor. That is the perfect marriage for me.
You know what? I totally agree with that. I think you need both of them to make this movie happen. And I think having them both as MVP is the right thing.
When this comes out, Margaret Sixel, yet again, there's a lot of people who came back. Production designer, Jenny Bevan for costumes.
Good.
Makeup. There's so many of the creatives that worked on Mad Max Fury Road that came back for Furiosa. And I am excited to see another movie besides 3,000 Year Longing that is directed by Margaret Sixel. But that being said, you said your MVP is Charlize Theron and Furiosa, the great Furiosa. 100% understand. Why would she not be? She's the MVP of the screen.
Yeah, you need all three parts for it to work. You need the director, you need the editor, and then you need the great performance by Charlize. So all three of them are given credit for this.
If Tom Hardy wasn't there, understandable, honestly.
We can make it work still.
And I think Miller cast a lot of, like, he cast some models also for the wives. And even then, like Rosie Huntington Whiteley, she is in Transformers 3, and the difference of performance in that versus 2 years later in Mad Max Fury Road is the difference between land and and space, essentially. And it's just Michael Bay versus George Miller. And it's like, you need to know, like, a great director can get a great performance no matter who the person is. So it's interesting. And it's like Charlize, obviously she got to have authority within what she did on this. And I don't think she's got this authority again in any performance. So definitely a marriage of like everybody together. And I would love to see Charlize again in this role, but it's not going to happen. And I don't think we need it to happen, right?
No, we don't.
If she does come back for Wasteland, I mean, I'm excited to see it, but I'm not begging for it.
No, I'm not either.
Like, how many times can you say, oh, this is the best movie of all time? This is a good movie. This is a visionary movie. Obviously, it's very hard to touch what they've done in this movie. And I would say the best thing you can do is to go support crazy brazen cinema, whether it's something like Furiosa, whether it's something like A Love Lies Bleeding, whether it's, no matter where it's coming from, if it's a small movie, medium-sized budget, or a big budget movie, if someone's really doing something bonkers, please go support it, especially on the big screen or any way that you can. Zach, do you have any companion movies for this?
Yeah, I have one. And it's a recent one, and it's pretty obvious. I think Dune 2 has a lot of crossover with this. I think both have gorgeous action scenes that take place in the desert. Both give you a lot of depth without overloading you with the information. Both talk to you about the dangers, the fanaticism They cover a lot of similar themes. If you really like watching really cool action in the desert, go watch Dune 2 if you haven't already. It's awesome.
Yeah, it is fantastic. And I will say the one thing that there's a lot of action in this movie where you're seeing all of the emotion come off, and it's just from the actors performing. And my recommendation is, if you haven't seen a lot of silent movies, maybe try one out.
Yeah.
Maybe not Nosferatu, but like try out, some Charlie Chaplin. That will blow your mind, honestly. And obviously, we have so many fantastic action movies, whether it's Jackie Chan or John Woo, Hard Boiled, Face Off, John Wick, The Raid, all those sorts, Bourne, Bruce Lee, whatever it is. Go watch the balletic motions of action. Become a student of action cinema. And that's how you convey stories in a very interesting way that's kind of marketable too. But I will say my main one is Mission Impossible 6 Fallout. There's a sequence in that movie that takes place in Paris where it's a chase scene and there's all these other things going on. But there is rarely any dialogue. There's just some music, there's a lack of music, and there's so much going on in that. And it's one scene that really does it. And that one scene, always worth watching. Besides that, I had to come back and add in just a little tidbit of recommendation, which is a book recommendation, which is Blood, Sweat, and Chrome, The Wild and True Story of Mad Max Fury Road, written by Kyle Buchanan, and it is a compilation. It's practically a documentary, a first-hand oral history source about the making of Mad Max Fury Road. It is a fantastic read. I've obviously been referencing it for the 2-hour runtime of this pod, and I hope everyone goes and checks it out. It was a fantastic read. I finally finished it, and it very much reminds me of the late, great Eleanor Coppola's work on A Heart of Darkness, but it is a book that was compiled during COVID. Different times, different means. But Mad Max Fury Road, just something else, man. Thank you, Zach, for letting me do this, because I love this movie.
Yeah, man. I it wasn't like as much as letting you do it. I love this movie too. I just know this movie has a special part in your movie-going life, and I think this is the perfect way to celebrate it, and I'm glad we got to have this conversation.
This movie, it stands as a reminder, a joy, and like a beacon of hope that, creative people can go and do something where, yeah, people are going to be skeptical. But if you're not in that sort of area, you're not going to know what's going to go on. Like, you have to have the audacity to have hope, be a rebel, and just try to not be apathetic when it comes to the systems of life or the systems of making movies. And we see it on screen and off screen that you're talking about that quote. And that's the quote we're going to end on. Where we must go, who we wander this wasteland, in the search of our better selves. Mad Max Fury Road.
I live, I die, I live again.
Witness me! Mediocre, Zach.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Cinema Pursuit. Cinema Pursuit is produced by Katie Nadell, Zach Nadell, and Vikas Patel. Special thanks to Cole Cooper for the intro and outro music. You can listen to Cinema Pursuit on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and wherever else you may listen to podcasts. Follow us on TikTok, YouTube, and Instagram at Cinema Pursuit Podcast, Twitter or X at Cin Pursuit Pod, and check out our subreddit, r/Cinema Pursuit.